All right, what's going on? Drive time Friday afternoon, about 8 minutes past the hour, 2 o'clock. It's not too cold right now, but get ready. Over the weekend, the coldest weather of the year is on its way. Probably get a little snow up in the mountains. Not sure if we'll get any down here in the benches, but I'm not a weatherman. Watch my guy Chase for that. But yeah, it's going to be cold over the weekend throughout the course of the start of next week. Happy Friday to you. Congratulations. You made it. Weekend time. Take a big old deep breath. Good job, everybody. Bring it in. We made it. Day by day, wake up. Don't want to get out of bed. Just pull yourself out of bed, pat yourself on the back, and get on with life. And if you do long enough, you can make it to the weekend, and certainly a weekend like this, with a lot of really exciting sports coming up. Of course, a lot of people believe what we're about to see in pro football over the weekend is the best playoff weekend in the NFL. That's up for debate. I'm a wild card guy. I think a lot of people believe the divisional is the best weekend. I get it. We do have 2 Saturday games and 2 Sunday games. We're going to get to some NFL football in the show today. We'll preview the weekend. We'll give you some picks before we get out of here and get you ready for a really fun pro football weekend. We have a massive game here in Salt Lake City tomorrow, and I've got to say, it feels like a lot of people are excited about this. So for a number of different reasons, obviously BYU beat Utah in football this year. Utah basketball beat BYU the last time they played. It was a close game. And I think at the start of the season, most people looked at this game and thought, okay, that could get ugly based off the expectations. But as we've learned, based off of preseason expectations, exercise in futility, as both teams appear to be pretty evenly matched. Ken Pomeroy, who I like a lot and does a great job on the college basketball tip, has Utah favored by a point. And essentially this Utah-BYU men's basketball game as a pick'em, as a toss-up, 50-50. So we'll get into the game today. We'll talk about it. We'll get ready for tomorrow's game. Utah's coming off a couple of Big 12 wins against OK State and TCU. BYU is still looking for their first road win of the season. And they're coming off a win against Oklahoma State, the same team that was here in Salt Lake. Common opponents for these two teams, Texas Tech, TCU, Oklahoma State. What is there really to be learned in scenarios like that? I don't think a ton, because this game, if you follow basketball and know about basketball, it is about matchups and is about who's available and the form of the team and certainly the home crowd. So it is a red out tomorrow at the Huntsman Center at 7 o'clock sharp for Utah BYU. We'll talk about that on the show today. I'll be in the building, excited for that, to see how this plays out. Obviously, it's a lot of fun when you see the red and the blue and the BYU and the Utah. It brings a lot of different emotions, and I think Utah fans are cautiously optimistic about the potential for the Utes to come away with the win. Utah women on the road at TCU, 2 top 25 teams. 5:30 Mountain Time on ESPN+. Utah's 13-4. TCU's 18-1. The Utah Jazz tip off tonight in the Big Easy to take on New Orleans at 6 o'clock Mountain Time. 2 really bad teams. The Pelicans, as you were. They've got a lot of talent on paper, but they're injured tonight, and the Jazz are sitting half their team. Regular season NBA basketball, it's fantastic. So we'll get to a little Jazz on the show as well. The Rangers beat the Utah Hockey Club last night here in Salt Lake 5-3. Utah Hockey Club gave up another lead. It is kind of becoming a trend with them. And so they're going to be taking on the Blues coming up tomorrow here in Salt Lake. They have this 7-game homestand, but they've already played 5 games. They've lost 4. So heading in the wrong direction. We saw some really good NBA basketball last night that we'll get to, some big picture NBA stuff on the program, and a big night of NBA hoops tonight. But, of course, a lot of football on the show. The Thunder paid the Cavs back, and Shea, you can't do anything with him when he's like that. He dropped 40 on the Cavs, and they won 134-114. That game was over by basically halftime, if not the end of the first. Thunder with an emphatic statement. So a lot to do on this Friday afternoon. As we reported at the end of the show yesterday, while we were drinking out of a fire hose, the new situation coming out of the U.S. Department of Education, which is now classified future revenue distributions from a school to an athlete for his or her NIL rights. It's now what's called financial assistance. Why is that important? Well, according to the Department of Education, financial assistance means, quote, it must be made proportionally available to male and female athletes or you risk violating Title IX. The easiest way to explain it is it depends on how many male athletes, how many female athletes you have on campus. If it's 50-50, the money has to be 50-50. That's the easiest way to explain it. Talked about it on the show yesterday, and we got a couple of guests that we'll kick the tires with on that as well. So busy Friday show. It's great to have you with us. Happy weekend. Hopefully you have some fun plans for this weekend, even though it's going to be a little bit chilly and cold. And obviously, didn't even mention Ohio State and Notre Dame. Coming up on Monday, Ohio State an 8.5-point favorite. So we do have a little college football to talk about on the show. All right, Ben Solak, right off the top. Our buddy who's now with ESPN and covers the NFL does a really, really good job bringing Ben today to preview the weekend in the NFL. Dave McMenamin drops your NBA Daily Assist. He works for ESPN as well, covers the NBA. Sean Mooney, who will be alongside Riles for the call tomorrow. BYU Utah men's basketball. Good friend of the program. Sean will stop by, hopefully give us a little optimism and some hope for the Utes to potentially beat BYU tomorrow here in Salt Lake. Max Brown for a preview of the Notre Dame-Ohio State College Football National Championship game presented by AT&T. Shout out to them, I guess. He'll stop by, and then more college football, Kyle Bonagura. So we got a lot to do. Ben Solak, Dave McMenamin, Sean Mooney, Max Brown, Kyle Bonagura, jam-packed guest list on a Friday. Me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners, happy Friday. And that guy, Porter Larson, on a Friday afternoon. And I can only speak for myself, but I feel like this is kind of a consensus. At the start of the season, you look at the schedules, you look at the expectations, you look at the talent, quite frankly, in my opinion, and you see January 18th, BYU at Utah. I think preseason, anticipating this week, felt like we would have been a little bit nervous that the Utes would get smoked. And now I'm sitting here the day before the game, and I'm like, 50-50, man. We'll see what happens. These two teams appear to be a lot more evenly matched than I anticipated.
Yeah, if you look at the matchup on paper today, you still probably look at BYU as a team that I think should be slightly favored, even coming in on the road, even coming in on a 3-game skid. But it's certainly a different matchup, Spence, than the one that you would have been looking at this offseason. It's been really remarkable kind of to see the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys of the teams here in the state. For BYU, big expectations coming in, and they sit at 2-3 in the conference today. For Utah, just trying to stay above water, man, and they come in tied with BYU currently at 2-3 in the conference. And then sneaky little Utah State up in Logan, who, obviously it's Holy War Hardwood Week this time around, but that's a team that is lost 2 games all season long. It's been some fun basketball the last few weeks here in the state.
Yes, it has, and we'll talk about it on the show in addition to get to all the other topics throughout the course of this Friday show to get you ready for a weekend. And Ben Solak will be our first guest on a Friday afternoon. But before we get to Ben, courtesy of our friends at Standard Restaurant Supply, it's your one-stop shop for all your tailgate needs, whether it's online or at their convenient location here in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's time now for your opening tip. The Holy War on the Hardwood, I guess, is what we're going to call it, as the University of Utah men's basketball team welcomes in Brigham Young. Coming up tomorrow night at the Huntsman Center. Want to remind you guys, this is a red out, so don't show up in your white or your black or your blue, quite frankly. Wear your red. I would imagine, I don't know what the percentage will be. Hopefully most of the Huntsman Center is packed with Utah red, but I would guess, based off the way BYU fans seem to be engaged with their program, 35% of that stadium will be blue, would be my guess, most of the upper deck. And then depending on how many Ute fans show up, actually, who own season tickets or have opportunities to go in the lower bowl, I would imagine the BYU fans will make their way down to the lower bowl to try to make as much noise as possible. Why am I bringing that up? Well, go to the game, wear red, sit in your seat, and don't let anybody wearing blue roll down to kind of make their voice heard. So, to start the season, this was a game that I think most Ute fans would have admitted, like, hey, prior to that BYU game coming up in January, it's going to be pretty nervy because BYU, on paper, has superior talent. They just do. They've got apparently a kid who is going to be a top maybe 7 or 8 pick in Yegor Demon. And Cannon Catchings, a lot of people believe, is a pro prospect, potentially being drafted in the first round. And Craig just does not have that type of pro talent. He does not have that type of just simple raw talent on his basketball team. I think Gabe Madsen's a player that can make some money playing pro basketball somewhere. I don't know if that's in the NBA. Maybe it's in Europe. But beyond that, it is a team that Craig has tried a lot of different things with. Keanu Dawes came off the bench against TCU and played really well. Dynamic athlete. And, a lot of what they do is off-ball, screen movement with Gabe, try to get him open. Utah is among the best in the country at assist to turnover rate, and they're one of the best teams in the Big 12 at assists per game. They do move the basketball. They do share it a lot, which is good because they do not have a ball-in-hand player that you simply can throw it to, isolate, go 1-4 flat, and say go make a play. They've got some players that I think have shown, some moments here or there, potentially being that guy, but it's kind of like the way the Jazz play under Will Hardy without it, a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or a Luka Doncic. And Lowry's really good, but he's not an ISO guy. He's not a 1-4 flat, ball-in-hand decision-maker guy. So the Jazz share the basketball. They move the basketball the way the Spurs did under Popovich with Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker. That was a free-flowing offensive system. And unless you have a ball-in-hand, ball-dominant playmaker who can make a play for himself, get his own shot, or get other players involved. We've seen players like that in the University of Utah program over the years. But there really isn't one of those guys on Utah's roster. And so what Craig relies upon is a big physical group that actually, as of late, has been playing with better pace. I don't know how intentional that is, but they do get up and down the floor. They do settle into their sets. They do move the basketball. They do play hard. And they're going to have to be really, really frosty to make sure their perimeter rotations are on point to stop a BYU team that can really get going from the outside if it's the wrong night for Utah. And this will come down to make or miss in a lot of ways because I've watched BYU and Big 12 play so far. And ultimately, I think, most everybody's surprised they have not won a road game. Most everybody's surprised they sit here in 2-3 in conference play, which is the same record as Utah and TCU. And the loser of this game actually it's not over, obviously, but the loser of this game will fall to 4 losses, and that puts, that school alongside Cincinnati, Arizona State, Oklahoma State, and K-State. Colorado is 0-5 in conference play, but if you have any premonition of being an NCAA tournament team, games like this are paramount, not just because it's Utah versus BYU. For BYU, it's a quad 1 opportunity. They do not have a quad 1 win on their roster. Now, since Utah is at home, this has been characterized as a quad 2 opportunity for the Utes. But if BYU is able to kind of figure out all of this talent and go on a run down the stretch, a win for Utah over Brigham Young tomorrow could be massive and could pay dividends down the stretch. So, ultimately, I've talked about this quite a bit, a lot of publicity, a lot of attention on the fact that since Kevin Young took over, he's been able to obviously sign A.J. Debanza on campus next year for 5 months to the tune of $7 million. He's the best player in his class. He's probably the best player in a number of classes, maybe 2 or 3. But on this team this year, he has 2 NBA players, the top 10 pick in Yegor Dedmon and potentially a first-round pick in Cannon Catchings, and some other players that could probably make some money. Keba Keita, who we know up here. I wonder how the fan base will respond to the return of Keba Keita. I mean, he's probably a pro, maybe a European guy, but a big body who can board. And for all of the attention on the talent acquisition, as I continue to say, Kevin's got to show that he can coach. Nobody knows if he can do this. It's his first time. I think he can grow into it. But there was this narrative where it's like, oh, man, BYU hired this incredible coach. Well, nobody knows that. They hired a guy with a great NBA pedigree and a great story to tell prospects to encourage them to play for Brigham Young, but we don't know if he can coach. And right now, when you look at the talent on their roster, the fact that tomorrow's game is essentially a pick'em, I view that as more of an indictment on BYU than a compliment to Utah. Because, again, it's just simply talent on paper. And then, as we've heard Craig say on his coach's show and here on the station, his task as a coach and his question as a coach is, are we not conveying to the group what they need to know? Or are they not getting it? And how do we kind of fix that? And Craig's tried a couple of different things with his rotations. Jake Wallin, who at one point was a Brigham Young commit, is now playing for Utah. He played 33 minutes, and I thought he played really, really well. He had 11 boards, really solid player. And again, Lawson Lovering, Mike Shrevjamps, like this is a big team. And Keanu Dawes coming off the bench, I think has added a little bit of an interesting wrinkle. Myro Little, who a lot of people thought could be that ball in hand guy, played 13 minutes, came off the bench. Hunter Erickson, another BYU recruit who transferred to Utah. You know, there are a lot of cross-pollination, man, not as much as football, but, you know, when you look at Kaba Keita, when you look at Jake Wallin, when you look at Hunter Erickson, Caleb Lohner, right? Once upon a time, a BYU Cougar. A lot of players on the floor tomorrow night that have experience with the other side. And I'll be interested to see what Kevin decides to do on Gabe Madsen, because if you watch Utah basketball, so much of what they do offensively is predicated on getting Gabe open and getting him looks and some airspace. And when it's funny, I don't know if you guys feel the same. Whenever I'm watching Utah basketball and Gabe has an open three and he misses, it feels the same way as like another player who misses a layup, because he is a big body kid who can really shoot it. He's only 35% on the year from three. But that's because the entire scheme defensively of the other team seems to be to jam him, to blitz him, send two off a screen, and make sure he has no airspace. That should open up opportunities, though, for other players in a way that it has at times. It's that gravity effect that we've seen from Stephen Curry in pro basketball. Gabe has that gravity effect because he is such a threat. But they're going to have to get Gabe loose. I don't think that they can rely on the other players to take advantage of the gravity simply to do their own thing, because we don't have enough data that indicates they can do that consistently. But when Gabe gets going, it changes things instantly, and we've seen it. So I would imagine Kevin Young relies on Richie Saunders, who not sure what the deal is with Red Bull or caffeine down there, but Richie, my man, looks like he smashes Red Bulls at every time out. He's a really good player. He's a high-energy guy, hence the Red Bull joke. Probably fell on deaf ears. But he's the type of guy that can really chase Gabe around and essentially gap him a little bit with some help. But they've got a lot of talent, BYU does. They've got pro players. They've got good guard play. One of the things that Kevin has done as of late, which I think is smart, he's tried out Dallin Hall and Yegor Demin together. Yegor Demin a little bit. But I think Dallin, because simply of his experience as a lead guard in high-level college basketball games, BYU was in the Big 12 a year ago. I often feel like they're better served with Dallin as the primary ball handler and playmaker and let Yegor play off the ball. Dallin just seems a little bit more composed. Yegor, at this point, is still getting some experience, and he's a little bit, I don't love to use this word, but he's a little bit frazzled at times and chaotic and unorganized. He can turn the basketball over a little bit, and that is BYU's Achilles heel. A little bit like the Jazz, they get loose with the basketball on offense, and they turn the ball over, oftentimes live ball turnovers, pick sixes, dunks, and layups the other way, and they can lose their focus defensively, and they allow a pretty high percentage of three-point shots to their opponent, something that Utah can capitalize on if they can get Gabe some space. But I got to say, juxtaposed to the start of the year when I'm like, oh, yeah, BYU's in town on January 18th. They're going to win by 50. I am surprised sitting here today, the day before the game, and being very willing to say this feels like a pick-em close game. Quad 1 opportunity for BYU, quad 2 opportunity for Utah. We're going to get back to this game because we have Sean Mooney joining us, who's going to be on the call with Riles today. But coming up on the other side, we'll preview the weekend in pro football with our buddy Ben Solak on a Friday drive. So keep it right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. A lot of NFL fans that believe the divisional round of the postseason is the best weekend of playoff football. I'm kind of a wild card guy myself. But our next guest, let's bring him in, man. The rising star that is still good enough to remember where he came from. You can see him and hear him on ESPN. He is my guy, Benjamin Solak, on a Friday. Ben, happy Friday, buddy. How we doing?
I'm well, Spence. How you been?
I'm good. Your favorite weekend of NFL playoff football is which and why?
I like conference championship weekend. I do. It was only the two games, and I think the whole I know why people like playoff football more than regular season football. From a viewing perspective, to me the regular season is more fun. I like the fact that there's a ton of games going on. I like whipping from game to game, being surprised by what games are good late. But for me in the postseason, there are 8 teams playing this weekend. For 3 of them, right? For the Commanders, for the Texans, and for the Rams, making it to the conference championship weekend would be a pretty significant achievement. Then, oh wow, well, what a good season, we really delivered. For the other 5, it's kind of like, all right, we expected to be there, we wanted to be there. To me, conference championship weekend is really when everybody's playing tooth and nail, blood in the game for, all right, we do this, we are just 2 games away. That's where it starts to get like elite and desperate, and real achievement happens. They start giving out trophies and shirts and hats and all that, John. And so of the playoff weeks, I really like conference championship weekend.
Love it, and hopefully we get some good games, even though Vegas likes some of these games to maybe get loose based off their lines. But before we get to the weekend, let me just kind of kick the tires with you on some of the storylines that have manifested themselves after the wild card weekend, and namely, what did that dud do for the potential future of Sam Darnold, either in Minnesota or elsewhere?
I think that, if Sam had a historic Super Bowl run and played wonderfully, then there would have been all this talk about him getting, $50 million, this, that, and the other thing. I don't think that would have happened because I think the league kind of knows what the guy is and how much Kevin O'Connell is helping him. And I think he would have gotten some mid-tier quarterback deal in the Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith range. We're talking somewhere in the 30s, right? 2 to 3 years. Now he played these 2 bad games against the Lions and against the Rams. Lights were super bright. Season was on the line. He crumbled in both of them. And I still think there's a pretty good chance he gets that Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith deal, right? The middle class of quarterbacking doesn't feel good to anybody. Nobody feels good about the price tag. None of the fans feel good about having the guy. And, can we really win a championship with him? Like, it is very awkward to have a middle-tier quarterback, but this is what it looks like, right? Sam Darnold played largely very well for the Vikings this season. They won 14 games. That is extremely difficult to do. And he did that certainly, with a guy in Justin Jefferson who's an elite receiver, and with a play caller in Kevin O'Connell who's a great play caller. But no one was walking into the season saying, oh, well, Jefferson's so good and O'Connell's so good, they'll win 14 games. Sam still brought a good bit to the table. And so to me, I think you're going to see Sam sign a 2 to 3 year deal somewhere in the $30 to $35 million range, either with the Vikings, if they're not feeling super great about J.J. McCarthy's, return from his knee injury, or I think more likely with another team. It's not a great free agent quarterback class. We've seen success for guys like Baker and like Geno in the past. And so to me, that's my expectation for Sam.
What is your preferred metric to analyze quarterback play? I was debating the guy that hosts our midday show, Sean O'Connell. We do a little crosstalk to kind of bridge the gap between midday and afternoons. And we were debating, whether or not wins and losses, quarterback stat, QBR rating, whatever it is, touchdown, INT. Since you cover this and you're kind of the guy for this over there, what are some of or your main metric to analyze quarterback play?
Yeah. So if there were one stat that got it done, I promise you we would have found it by now, and every quarterback contract would be perfect for the rest of the time, right? Unfortunately, there is not. There's no one way to skin the cat. There's no one way to know. What we like to look at in terms of advanced analytics are 2 stats called expected points added and success rate. Expected points added basically looks at all the historical data of football. We have trillions of examples of 1st and 10 from the 30, right? With 15 minutes left in the first quarter. We have so many plays that we know, okay, if you get a 20-yard gain on that play, you're X more likely to score on that drive. Versus you get a 5-yard gain, you're Y more likely to score. Expected points added measures each individual play and says, oh, you've made your team a little bit more likely to score a touchdown, a little bit more likely to score the field goal. You've added some expected points on this drive. Success rate takes a much more binary look. Instead of saying, oh, you've added exactly 0.02 expected points on this drive, it says, did you add expected points, yes or no, right? It's either a check or a minus, and then we end up with a percentage of how many of your plays are positive, how many of your plays added expected points. Those 2 metrics in tandem give us a good benchmark understanding of, is a quarterback creating positive plays for his offense? When he does so, is he doing it through a few big explosive plays, with a lot of bad plays mixed in, or is he kind of doing it as a nickel and dimer where he's always getting, 5 yards, 6 yards, and not really creating any big gains, or is it somewhere in the middle? So those are the 2 that you look at to get a benchmark feel for quarterback analysis. But those two metrics would tell you that, like, Tua Tagovailoa is the best quarterback in football. And you and I both know that's not the case. And so, as always, it's an imperfect view.
See, it's so interesting because I push back on the whole wins or quarterback stat, wins and losses, and then Sean throws at me, so you think Patrick Mahomes is the 8th best quarterback in the NFL? And I understand his point, right? What do those metrics that you just outlined, what do they say about a guy like Patrick Mahomes, who is the quarterback for the team that is favored to win the Super Bowl for the 3rd straight time, and they went 15-2?
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes is one of the highest success rates in all of football this year. And again, success rate is just measuring, all right, are you having a positive play or a negative play? Did you help the offense, gain a new first down, stay ahead of the sticks or not? And that's exactly how the Chiefs offense is operating this year. Not a ton of explosives, not a big chunk gains, ripping off big 3rd and long, scoring touchdowns from 40 yards out, but they are extremely methodical and they inch their way down the football field. And so Mahomes is playing a very point guard style, mature style, don't turn the football over, don't make the mistake style that's reflected in his numbers. Now, again, this Mahomes in 2024, the same argument that was made to you could not have possibly been made in 2023 or 2022. It's kind of specific to this season that the Chiefs are 15-1 with Mahomes as a starter, despite the fact that the offense isn't all that explosive. In a lot of other seasons, they'd be 12-3, right, or 11-4 with Mahomes as the starter, and then you wouldn't be able to make such a case. Quarterback wins has some veracity to it, because experienced quarterbacks know how to handle late game situations. They're able to turn losses into wins in the last 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes of the game. But the other 54 minutes are extremely meaningful, and the plays that happen in those games are reflected in data, and they're reflected in our understanding of the quarterback. So quarterback wins help us understand a part of quarterback play. They, like all stats, they don't give us the entire understanding of quarterback play.
Before we get to the games, selfishly, who are my Jets going to land on here? Who's going to coach? Who's going to run the front office?
I think the dream is Aaron Glenn, who's the defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions. Obviously, was a good corner, as you very well know, for the Jets there in the late 90s. In terms of who might come with him, I'm not too sure about if there's been conversations with him. I know I heard that Ryan Griggs and Brian Flores saying, I think Flores would be a great hire. I just don't know if Grigson coming along is exactly who you want to hitch your wagon to. So they've obviously had a very wide net on that coaching search. And as of right now, I don't think any leaders in the clubhouse have been defined. It also seems like they're interviewing a lot of guys who have been around the yard a few times, right? Guys who've been on TV, kind of guys who are some prominent names and some visible names for Woody Johnson. And I'm not sure that's always the best way to go about things. I imagine that some of it is just those are the names that he's heard of and the names that he put on his short list. So to me right now, it doesn't seem like there's any leader in the clubhouse. But if I were rooting for one horse in the race, it'd be Glenn for sure.
All right, before we set you loose so you can get ready for TV, let's do some rapid fires on these games coming up, and we'll just go in order. First game is Texans-Chiefs. We saw these two teams play. The Texans have that great defensive front. They could only get to Mahomes once. Kansas City's getting 8 at home. What do you think goes down, Ben?
8's probably too big for a game that's going to be low scoring, going to be physical, cold weather. It's going to be close. Houston's offense is in a really bad place right now, right? No Tank Dell. They just lost their tight end, Cade Stover, for the rest of the season. So as you saw against the Chargers, it took like a few haphazard explosive plays for this offense to finally start working, and start working there is in scare quotes, right? Like the 32 points is lying to you. They had 4 turnovers on defense. Like that's what led to the high total. Without Tank Dell back there, who got injured in this last Chiefs game, they don't really have anybody to pull attention off of their star receiver, Nico Collins. And when Chiefs defense coordinator Steve Spagnuolo gets a clear star receiver, he's excellent. He's great at pressing that player and bracketing him and throwing him a bunch of different coverages, making you throw through somebody else. And so the Texans need this to stay a very low scoring, very stinky field position defensive sort of a game. And they're certainly capable of playing that. Great pass rush, right? Excellent corner play. But this is Mahomes at home in the playoffs over 4 quarters. Eventually, if the Chiefs are able to sustain enough drives, get 14, 17 on the board and put the Texans in a clear pass situation, they're not really built to overcome that deficit. So I think it's going to be close for much of the game, but I don't think the Chiefs are ever going to feel outside of control. I expect them to win. Lions
are getting 9.5 over the Commanders, and obviously it's been such a fun story. At one point, prior to transferring down to LSU, Jaden Daniels was a Pac-12 kid. And I can remember watching him. Yeah, I can remember watching him play, being like, he's kind of fun. He's kind of electric, and so. But I don't think anybody saw this. But it's been really fun. It's a cool story. I would imagine it comes to an end at Ford Field. Ben, what do you think?
It most likely does. The Lions are extremely large and very physical, and this Commanders defense is very physical, but is not extremely large. And usually when those two teams meet, the offense mows down the defense, right? I think you're going to see the Lions have a ton of success running the football. David Montgomery back in this game. The right guard, Kevin Zeitler, is out for this one. The rookie, Christian Mahogany, is in. I don't think that's enough of a knock on the Lions' rushing attack for it to lose any steam. I really think that you're going to see the Lions physically impose their will. Not a lot of Jared Goff dropbacks when he does. Big play action shots over the top, and we know Detroit is very good at those. So I expect Detroit to pour on a ton of points. And if you're Washington, in order to keep up with that, you have to move the ball, but you have to do it explosively. You have to do it fast. And for as good as Washington's offense has been, and for how wonderful Jaden Daniels has been, this team does not generate a lot of explosive plays. They convert a lot of third downs and fourth downs. They're actually a lot more methodical than people realize. Rely on the running game, the passing game behind the line of scrimmage, to just kind of stay ahead of the sticks. That means if you make one or two mistakes on the road in Detroit in Ford Field, then all of a sudden you're behind on the scoreboard, because Detroit's probably not going to punt too many times in this game. And so I think with a rookie quarterback and with that home field advantage, I think Detroit's edge is simply too much. But yeah, electric plays in this one should be high scoring.
So impressed with, and have been for a long time. We talked about Kansas City's ability to kind of bring whatever the game needs to win. And I feel like Sean McVay's the type of coach that can do that, as we saw against the Vikings and have seen from time to time. It is going to be snowy. It is going to be cold. That feels like it really favors Philly. They're getting 6.5. What do you think happens in Philadelphia with the Rams and the Eagles?
Yeah, I was willing to talk about, maybe it's interesting. The Rams offense is a little bit better against the Eagles than the scoreboard indicated last week, and so on and so forth. But once we're talking about, wintry mixes, high winds, below freezing temperatures, it really becomes a running game and a trenches game. And this Rams defense, which statistically has improved over the back half of the season, they win through their defensive line. Coverage-wise, they're kind of holding it together with some good players and some veterans, and it's not great, but they're doing their best. But they need that pass rush to win. That's all their defensive success comes from that front four. And the Eagles have the best offensive line of football. They have the ability to neutralize a front four in a way that pretty much no other team in the league does. And so you expect a high running game, which favors the Eagles. You like the Eagles' ability to neutralize the Rams' defensive front. You like Vic Fangio, the Eagles' defensive coordinator, who's historically been pretty good against Sean McVay and the iterations of his offense across the league. And if Matthew Stafford blacks out in the postseason, then this thing's going to be tight. But again, even if Stafford's throwing dots, we're catching the ball in sloppy conditions. We're trying to create after the catch with slippery footing. It's a bad draw for the Rams. I think if the Eagles could have picked any NFC opponent to face in the divisional round, they would have picked the Rams. They just match up so nicely into that team. So I think that's Eagles all the way.
Insert your corny Tyson Holyfield, Ali Frazier boxing reference for our final game. Yeah. But of course, it's going to be awesome. And either way, the story that manifests as a result of the winner will be interesting, and the loser will additionally have a lot of attention and conversation. But Ravens, Bills at Orchard Park, in Orchard Park at Highmark Stadium. Baltimore has had the line move towards them. They're getting 1.5, and the over-under is 51.5. It's going to be a lot of fun no matter what. But what do you see going down here, Ben?
Yeah, the game here is decided by the wide receivers, weirdly enough, right? You have two MVP quarterbacks. You have a Derrick Henry, right? You have all these star names. But for the Bills in the last game, they really had to win their one-on-ones on the outside, right? The Ravens do an excellent job on defense, dropping safeties into the middle of the field, and they drop guys off the line of scrimmage and get into the throwing windows. But they give you one-on-ones on the outside, and they threw a lot of balls up to Keon Coleman, had some success. But they didn't have Amari Cooper in that game. So they're going to need Coleman and Cooper, their two wide receiver acquisitions this year, right, in place of Stephon Diggs, in place of Gabriel Davis, to be winners on the outside against one-on-one coverage. You have to be able to do that against the Ravens. And then on the Ravens side of the ball, there's probably no Zay Flowers in this game, right? Ravens had to complete one pass wide receivers against the Steelers in that game. Just a ludicrously easy performance throwing the football through the air for Baltimore. Against the Bills, who are going to put a blanket on top of you and going to prevent you from hitting the explosive play, of course the Ravens are going to run it. They're going to throw behind the line of scrimmage, and they're going to inch their way down the field. But eventually, you hit a third and long. Eventually, you're trailing by 7 in the third quarter because Buffalo's playing great. You need Rashad Bateman to step up. You need like a Nelson Aguilar to step up. It can't just throw it through Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews the whole game. So whichever team's wide receivers make those 2 or 3 critical plays, that might be the difference in what we expect to, very close, very high-scoring affair.
Ben, you're the man. We'll set you loose. I understand you'll be in Detroit, so enjoy that game and travel safe. And as always, appreciate the time, okay?
Thank you, Spence. You take care now.
All right, Ben Solak, NFL analyst over at ESPN. He's on the Mina Kimes podcast every, I think, Thursday throughout the week. Get him on Twitter at Benjamin Solak is where you find him. He's been coming on our show since he was like 12. I don't know if it was that young, but he still looks like he's 15. But yeah, I've been joining the show for about 10 years now, and about 5 years, and it's been fun to watch his star rise. So I do appreciate his time. So we've got a couple of really, really intriguing matchups. Vegas is anticipating games that really will not be that close. I think Ben did a good job of outlining why the Chiefs and the Texans have a chance to be a little bit closer than that 8-point spread. Lions are getting 9 in the hook at home against the Commanders. Then Philly, this line has moved towards the Eagles as a result of some very, very inclement and unfortunate weather in the Philadelphia area. Rainy, cold, snowy, windy. Philly's a 6.5-point favorite. The over-under is 43.5. Baltimore is a 1.5-point favorite. In Orchard Park at Highmark Stadium over the Bills, and that over-under is 51.5. Who do you like, Porter, in the Sunday night tilt? And also, what would make – this is weird because I think either quarterback is topical. What would be the best story that emerges out of a winner on Sunday night in Buffalo?
It's hard because both of those guys, in Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, are what we think of as MVP level players who haven't got over that hump yet. Right now, you talk about how the Jazz got really close, and there was that one guy. There was Michael Jordan there, right? You talk about the same kind of things in the East with LeBron, and to make an NFL parallel, it's Patrick Mahomes. That is the guy that you want to beat in those one-on-one, head-to-head quarterback scenarios. And when it comes down to the big game, Pat has got the best of both of those guys each time, and they still have to win that one. So the storyline that comes out of this game, particularly, I don't think means as much for one of those guys as much as it does the chance that it gives them at Pat Mahomes once again, right? Because they're, I think, kind of on a similar footing where we know what Josh Allen is. We know what Lamar Jackson is. But getting to that next level, you can be as good as you have been your entire career. Doesn't matter if you don't beat Patrick Mahomes because he's going to go and win a third straight Super Bowl if you don't. And so I think that's the main storyline. It's not this week on Sunday. It's the opportunity you give yourself later on in the postseason if you're able to beat your opponent that you look across from on Sunday.
Little conflicting news regarding Zay Flowers, who missed the wild card win for Baltimore. One report has him as doubtful, and then some breaking news on the crawl just says that Jim Harbaugh indicated to the media that he does have a chance to play. So a little bit of injury news. The good news is there doesn't seem to be like a ton of injuries that should affect games, but obviously Zay Flowers, I was surprised to learn that the first all-pro wide receiver ever drafted by the Baltimore Ravens, and obviously Lamar likes him an awful lot. So some pro football. Don't forget, we are your home of the NFL in this market. We're your home of the biggest and best live college and pro football events with Wild Card Weekend, and obviously we'll have the national championship game coming up on Monday, which is Notre Dame and Ohio State. We're going to do a little NBA with Dave McMenamin. Sean Mooney stops by, started the show off today with some stuff and some thoughts, some opinions on what is now shaping up to be a really intense and exciting matchup coming up tomorrow here in Salt Lake City as the Utah men's basketball team welcomes in Brigham Young. When you look at the metrics, these two teams are very similar in several areas when it comes to points, field goal percentage, rebounds, and turnovers. BYU has a better net ranking. This is a quad 1 win opportunity for Brigham Young. It's a quad 2 win opportunity for the University of Utah. Ken Palm, good friend of the show, has the Utes favored by 1 point, but his metric has this as a literal toss-up, 50% on both sides. The ESPN FBI actually favors Utah, gives BYU a 48.7% chance to beat BYU, and the early lines, according to FanDuel, favor the Utes. Utah's a slight favorite. Coming up tomorrow here in Salt Lake against BYU. Want to remind you that is a red-out game. And if you've been looking for a reason to head up, you probably hear talking heads like me say, what gives? Why isn't that building full? Where is everybody? If you want to get motivated, just go buy a ticket, or if you have season tickets, show up, because my guess is the tickets that are available on the secondary market are going to be essentially snagged pretty quickly by BYU fans. And I'm just picturing the upper bowl filled with blue, looking down, and if they don't see those seats filled, they're probably going to walk down and kind of fill them. So if you're looking for something to do on a Saturday night, first of all, sorry if you don't have anything. Life happens. Why not a little Utah Utes basketball as they take on BYU coming up tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Excited to be in the building for that game. The Jazz are in action tonight in the Big Easy. They're taking on New Orleans. Utah women will be in action at 5:30 our time. It's a big game. TCU, top 10 team. Utah women, number 23. That game can be seen on ESPN+. You can hear it, of course, here on the station. Hockey Club lost to the Rangers last night. Going to take on the St. Louis Blues tomorrow. So there you go. Big night of NBA hoops. We'll get to NBA coming up on the other side with our buddy Dave McMenamin. Don't forget Sean Mooney stops by to preview Utah BYU. Max Brown for a preview of the college football national championship game. We'll do some Utes and some Big 12 with Kyle Bonagura on a busy Friday show before we catch a break for the 2 o'clock hour. Want to tell you about my friends at Prize Picks. It is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. You have a chance to win up to 1,000 times your money right now. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game all season long. 1 hour down, 3 hours to go on a Friday. Keep it here on ESPN 700. All right, excited to catch up with our guy Dave McMiniman coming up in just a little bit to do a little basketball, a little NBA. Sean Mooney's going to be our guest at your alarms for about 30 minutes from right now. Sean will be on the call alongside with our guy Riles for the Utah BYU basketball game that comes your way tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Max Brown stops by. We'll do some Utah football and some Big 12 football with Max, but of course we'll lean into a comprehensive preview of that national championship game between Notre Dame and Ohio State coming up on Monday night. And then we'll finish the 4 o'clock hour, at least today, with Kyle Bonagura, who stops by to do some more college football. Maybe a little RSL with Kyle. He covers MLS and soccer as well. No new news on the RSL front. They're just breaking it down and trying to build it back up. We'll do some RSL throughout the course of the next few weeks to get ready for their CONCACAF match. So tomorrow, Utah BYU, as we've discussed on the show today, this feels much different. And I don't know how you guys feel about this, but the Friday before this game feels markedly different than I anticipated how it would feel to start the year. And, of course, a lot of that is trying to prognosticate. And if you listen to the show, I'm more of a diagnose as to what just happened as opposed to a prognosticate what's going to happen, because trying to predict this stuff is impossible. It's why gambling on sports is an exercise in futility. If you think you can do it, well, go to Vegas. That's why there's a new casino built, every other week, and that's why these sports books are making money hand over fist. It's impossible even for people who play the sport, even for people who coach in the sport. That's why these idiots who try to gamble while they're coaching or playing, all they do is end up getting themselves in trouble, because even if you're in the mix, it's hard to anticipate what's going to happen. And yes, there are sharks that allocate their full energy and their full time to try to, get little tidbits here, there, pieces of information here or there. And over time, maybe you win 52% of your bets over like 5 years, and maybe you can make some money. But it's just hard to predict and hard to prognosticate. But I think it's safe to say prior to the start of the year, most people, including myself, felt like the Friday before BYU Utah on the hardwood would kind of feel a little bit like a doomsday scenario, because BYU simply has better talent. They've got a top 10 potential draft pick in Yegor Demon. They've got, according to most mock drafts, a first-round pick and the Catchings kid, who at times has looked pretty good, the Cannon Catchings kid. He came off the bench, I believe, the other night, and I think Kevin Young, just like Craig Smith, still in the mix of in the midst of finding the right starting five, finding the right rotation. What does it look like when Yegor Demon and Dallin Hall are on the floor together? I feel like Dallin's a better initiator at this point. He's just a more poised college point guard, having been through Big 12 play before. Seems to have more of a calming effect on his team. And on the Utah side, can they get Gabe loose? And if BYU is going to blitz, if they're going to stunt, if they're going to trap Gabe, can the other players take advantage of the gravity effect to try to get some buckets and knock down some threes early? The early portion of this, to me, is going to be pretty fascinating to see how both teams handle the emotion. It does feel like, and we'll see what the building looks like, but there is more buzz and optimism from the Utah fan base with this game than I anticipated. So part of me felt like, because of the discrepancy of talent when we got to this point of the season, maybe that building would be filled with blue. And I do feel like I don't know what the percentage will be, 25, 30%. I feel like there's going to be plenty of BYU fans who grab tickets off the secondary market and try to find their way down to the lower bowl after initially sitting in the upper bowl. So I would just encourage you fans to show up and wear red. It is a red out. And, support these young men. They're working hard to try to get better. And now we have some tangible results to indicate that they're doing just that. Winning back-to-back Big 12 championship games. They went down and really, for the most part, handled TCU start to finish. And TCU was able to beat BYU. Both these two teams smoked Oklahoma State. Texas Tech rolled into the Huntsman Center and took it to Utah pretty good. And BYU was able to hang with Texas Tech at home, but Texas Tech beat them in Provo. So we have three common opponents to try to analyze exactly how these two teams match up. Utah, as I referenced earlier, is a very slight favorite in Vegas. They're favored by 1.5. And according to Ken Pomeroy, who's kind of the North Star for all of us college basketball geeks, Utah is a slight favorite. But the pick'em scenario, the percentages in his database, has this as a toss-up. A 50-50 game. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, Ute fans may be hoping for a little bit of payback for the football loss earlier this year. And I've always struggled to kind of accurately analyze if the BYU Utah football game is a 10 with the passion at the sky high limit and the intensity sky high at a 10. I don't know where the basketball rivalry kind of fits in. It obviously isn't football because college basketball just isn't college football. How much of a payback dynamic is at play here if you're a Utah fan? Of course, it's not nothing. But when you show up to the Ward on Sunday, are you bragging about Utah basketball beating BYU? The last time these two teams played, Utah was able to get the win. BYU has not won a road game yet, so this would be their first road game. This is a quad one opportunity for BYU, mostly because they're on the road, right, in a conference game, rivalry game. It's a quad two opportunity for the University of Utah. So big games for both teams, quite frankly. Utah 9-2 at home, and they average 80.6 points at home. They've outscored their opponents by 10.7 points per game. Of course, a lot of that was preseason play, cracking on some lesser opponents. And now it's big boy Big 12 time. And this is a sneaky big game for both because the loser falls to 4 losses on the season. And if you're going to get to 9 conference wins, I'm not sure that either BYU or Utah will get to double-digit conference wins, but if you can get to 7, 8, 9 conference wins in Big 12 play, maybe your postseason opportunity presents itself in a different way, right? And of course, there is a ton of basketball left to play and a ton of opportunities for both these teams to play top shelf teams, both home and away, to change the narrative about who they are. But as we sit here, BYU is they have a better net ranking, they have a better Ken Pom ranking. And we'll see if Utah can kind of climb their way up. But a win coming up over BYU tomorrow would be a really big step in the right direction, I think, for Craig and his team, who right now are just trying to capitalize on a couple of straight wins and prove to the fan base that what we've seen over the past couple of games isn't a moment in time, but maybe who the team is now. And Craig simply has won wherever he's been as a coach. And oftentimes, I do think in college athletics, there are athletic directors and administrators who don't give their coaches enough time. It's not as prevalent or prominent as it is in pro basketball or pro football. In the NBA, like winning coach of the year is a death sentence. You lose your job the next season. And we've seen rough starts in pro football cost coaches their job 2 years after they've signed a deal, sometimes a year after they sign their deal. But Mark Harlan clearly believes in Craig Smith. He's going to give him time. But I do think this year is big for Craig. Not necessarily go win the Big 12, not necessarily we're going to judge you super harshly on exactly what happens, but if there isn't a tangible move in the right direction, if the progress isn't something that you can kind of see that's a little bit more obvious as opposed to hey, we're practicing hard and we're on our way, what does the conversation start to sound like? Craig gets paid really well. I mean, the narrative of, maybe our in-state schools not paying their coaches the way that other schools don't, maybe that's applicable at times down at Brigham Young, although they're paying Kevin a lot of money and they extended Kalani. Craig is a very well-compensated college coach. This is a good job. And that's why when it came open, I was, I won't say I was surprised that Mark went with Craig because Craig, like I said, is a well-respected coach across the country. He's an energetic guy that's won wherever he's been. Coming from Utah State, understands the landscape of our local market and what you have to do to recruit and win. But the Utah basketball men's coaching job is an elite job. It's not a blue blood job, but it's as close to it maybe as any school that's not among, the Kentuckys and the UNCs and the Dukes or what have you. And I thought Mark might open it up to a national search. And we heard a lot of names back then, but Craig gets the job. And now we're sitting here after a few years just wondering whether or not Utah basketball is getting the support they need in order to get the talent they need to compete in the best conference in the country. And if they have the talent, then what does that mean for the coaching? And as Craig has talked about, is it the matter of me not communicating to them what they need to be doing, or are they not understanding the message? Well, the message it appears that it starts to creep in a little bit because while Utah does not have an NBA prospect that they can just give the ball to like they do to Yegor Demin and say 1-4 flat isolation, go make a play, what they've leaned into is Chris ball movement, and they're the best assist team in the Big 12. They don't have one dude. Now, they rely a lot on Gabe, but they don't use Gabe as an ISO guy very much because he's not that player. He just isn't. He is a big-body kid that can really shoot it, and he has improved his strength and his ability to attack the glass. That's something he didn't have when he first came here. But Utah basketball under Craig Smith, it is a big physical team that as of late, they've played with more pace. They've been able to get up and down a little bit. They share the basketball and they play hard. Now, play hard typically is something that I kind of roll my eyes at, but playing hard and being crisp on your rotations against Brigham Young is going to be paramount. Because when you watch BYU play, more often than not, they lose when it's make or miss because they do get good shots. You know, they do have good playmakers. They have guys that can dribble, pass, and shoot. They move pretty crisply. They have some big bodies that can set screens. Of course, Fus Traore, who's still there, and obviously Keba Keita, who was up here. And if Richie Saunders is hitting his three, if Trevin Knell, who's only a spot-up shooter. I mean, Trevin Knell is the type of guy you're just like, just put a hand in his face. You can play off him a little bit because he can't even dribble. But if he's open, he's a knockdown shooter. Cannon Catchings has shown a little bit of promise here or there. He's a great athlete that can attack the glass. He's only shooting 32% from three. But Dawson Baker, Dallin Hall, you know, they've got a lot of players that can get going from the outside. And if they're hot from three, they're hard to beat. And if you're Craig and if you're Utah, you've got length, you've got physicality. If you rotate on the perimeter and if you bother shooters and take away their airspace, and if you make them play a physical brand of basketball where it's not just a game of horse where everybody's open, Utah has a legitimate chance of winning this game. Now, on the other side, Utah really has to rely upon getting Gabe in space. Now, it doesn't just mean getting Gabe in space to shoot it, because if BYU is going to do with, you know, what every other team has done against Utah, Gabe is on the first page of everybody's scouting report. It's Gabe Madsen. Okay, this is the dude we have to stop. Now, because he is so smart off the ball, think like the way Reggie Miller used to move. He's, you know, in a way, that's kind of a good parallel. Now, Reggie Miller is one of the greatest shooters of all time, and I'm not a comp guy. I'm not saying Gabe Madsen is Reggie Miller. But watching Reggie Miller over the years break the Knicks' heart, he was not a ball-in-hand ISO guy. He was a dude that would run forever and get pick set by these Davis brothers, Antonio Davis, Dale Davis, Rick Schmitz, all those big dudes to get Reggie in space. And when Reggie was in space, he was a killer, because he could knock down a shot, but he was also an underrated passer. So the gravity effect with Gabe is going to be paramount. Don't just get him in space to shoot it. Get him in space so if BYU stunts and blitzes, other players are open, and maybe Wallin can hit some threes. Maybe Sharaf Jamps hits some threes. Maybe some of the players, maybe Kano Dawes continues this evolution, and he is just a stud athlete, and he's played really well. Maybe Hunter Erickson off the bench, former BYU transfer, can get some open looks. Because if those guys get open looks, they start knocking down shots. What does that encourage BYU to do? Okay, we can't blitz Madsen. We have to allocate our personnel across the landscape of the entire court, and then Gabe gets looks. And if Gabe gets looks and if Gabe gets going, he's good enough that he can change everything. So what does BYU do to stop that? I would imagine Kevin sicks Richie Saunders on Gabe Madsen and says, I want to know what flavor gum he's chewing after the game. Hoosiers reference, kids, look it up. Fantastic movie. And then, you know, utilizes the length of a Cannon Catchings, the grit of a Dawson Baker, and gives Gabe a bunch of different looks and try to knock him off his spots. If he's coming off his screen, make sure the bigs, make sure, you know, Fus Traore, or obviously a guy that we know in Keba Keita, they're hedging out. Don't worry about a lot of the rolls to the rim. Make sure that we handle the shooters first, and then we'll figure everything else out. But this game, it really is a fascinating chess match because these two teams aren't similar. They don't have similar styles of play. They don't have similar personnel. And they have two coaches that seem to coach a little bit differently. That's what makes it fascinating. In a way, this is Kevin Young against Craig Smith. And honestly, right now, give me Craig. I know Kevin has all the cachet. I know he has all the attention because he's the NBA guy that hired these coaches that coached in pro basketball. And their strength and conditioning staff is from the NBA. Their nutritionist is from the Phoenix Suns. Like, I get all the headlines around Kevin. I get it. Because what they're signing, as far as the talent goes, is undeniable. But when you have undeniable talent on paper, guess whose job it is to make sure that works? It's the coach. If you have the talent, then we have to talk about the coaching. And I think right now it's safe to say Kevin's still getting his footing because he's never done this before, and that's fine. But Craig is a grizzled college basketball veteran that knows how to put together a game plan. And I honestly feel like if Utah basketball at some point could go the way of BYU with the collective and find a way to lock in some top-tier talent consistently, and look, it is much easier said than done. Because even if Utah basketball locks it in for 1 year, how many players are going to stick around? And how much of the college football narrative and conversation is permeating into college basketball? Now, college basketball has always had the one and done, and so it's always been a little bit different. But Utah basketball hasn't had a one and done talent in a number of years, and really hasn't had a ton of pro talent. Brandon is actually getting some minutes with OKC, which is cool, Brandon Carlson. But it's been a long time since Utah's had a guy that's like, is he going to leave to go to the pros, right? And so now is he going to leave to go to the portal? But like Davon Smith last year rolled into town and was like threatening, I believe he broke the Pac-12 record for triple doubles. I think that was held by Jason Kidd, if my memory serves correctly. So like we have seen ball in hand decision makers here for a moment, but of course Davon goes to St. John's and it was tough to see him go. So Craig has, he has essentially formulated his schematic and X's and O's approach to his personnel, because there's not a Davon Smith on this team. There's not a ball-in-hand decision-maker, initiator to get his own shot or get something for his teammates if the shot clock breaks down. Now, that's not as prevalent in college basketball as it is in the pros. In the pros, you got to have the guy. If there's 5 or 6 seconds left on the shot clock, you throw it to him, you say, okay, do something because our set didn't work. And Utah basketball doesn't play like that because they don't have a guy like that. And what they're elite at so far is the ball movement and the assist-to-turnover ratio. They have been playing with better pace. BYU does want to run up and down the floor. So I'll be interested to see if there's a point of emphasis for Craig to slow it down. How many players are crashing the glass? How many players are getting back? Is it an intentional schematic decision to make sure you're going to take the air out of the basketball and you do not want BYU to get out in transition, start getting some of those rhythm threes, get some confidence, take the Huntsman Center crowd out of the game early? And then you're looking around and you're kind of like, all right, well, we're down, because Utah basketball, at least so far, I think it's fair to say, I don't know if offensively they're built to come back from some massive double-digit deficit. I think Utah's got to keep this thing close down the stretch, keep the crowd into it, right? And again, it is a red out, 7 o'clock tomorrow, so make sure you show up wearing your red. And keep the crowd into it, keep it close down the stretch, and hope a couple of bounces go your way. Hope you can get Gabe in space, and hope that your length and your strength with Lawson Lovering and, Mason Madsen, Gabe's brother, he's a big body kid as well, didn't play as many minutes last game. Keanu Dawes, does he continue to rise? And then the role players, what does it look like? Can Hunter knock down some shots? Can Jake Wallin, a former BYU Cougar, play well against his old team to show them that maybe they blew it by not keeping him around? How will Gabe Ikeda be received as he's back at the Huntsman Center after transferring to BYU? And this is what it's all about, man. Like, this is what makes it fun. As we talked about on the show this week, one of the themes we were discussing yesterday off a piece that Gordon Monson wrote for the Tribune about, the Jazz and the hockey club basically having the worst home records in their respective leagues, and ultimately comparing that to the Jazz teams of the past, which really isn't fair because some of those historic Jazz teams are head and shoulders above anything that we've seen since the late 90s. What makes you motivated to watch a basketball game or a football game as opposed to sitting down and firing up your favorite movie? It's the potential for the unknown. It's the potential for the thing that we don't see coming. It's the potential for the kid that you've never heard of to rise up and knock down a big shot down the stretch. It's the potential for Utah basketball to maybe upset BYU, when at the start of the season this felt like a massive monumental mismatch. And honestly, on paper, if we're fair, it kind of is, with just strictly a raw talent perspective. But college basketball, one of the reasons it is different than the NBA is that it's not as superstar driven, and it never has been. There could be a team that has, like Rutgers, right? They've got potentially 2 of the top 4 or 5 picks in the draft. They might not go to the tournament. Ben Simmons 1 year at LSU. Like, there are so many examples of like transcendent great players and teams that have a couple of them losing to teams that are coached well and play the right way in college basketball. That's what makes March Madness insanely entertaining, because, a 16 seed can knock off a 1 seed. We've seen that. 15 knocks off 2, and I could keep going. I mean, the upsets in March Madness, that's what makes that tournament and that sporting event different. And in my estimation, the best thing we have on the sporting calendar, because it reminds you of what a great sport this actually is. Even though it suffered as of, the past, generation, some rule changes badly need to be made. It is slow at times. The shooting isn't great at times, and players don't stick around as long as they used to, so they don't grow into themselves as college players. They want to make money playing in the pros, which is understandable. Now, will NIL allow players to maybe stay in college basketball a little bit more, therefore developing their game in college and maybe rising up and becoming better players while they're in college as opposed to just waiting until they're playing in the pros? I guess only time will tell, but this really is what it's all about. Utah, BYU, every time you see the red and the blue, every time you see the royal blue and the crimson red, like it's just different no matter what it is, no matter what sport it is. It could be swimming, it could be softball, it could be soccer, whatever it is. And when it's football, of course, there's an extra bit of juice around here, but I am sensing that tomorrow night could be a little bit more exciting than any of us thought that potentially it was going to be. So once again, it will be at 7 o'clock tomorrow. It is a readout. So stay tuned for that game. A couple of other things we've been kind of kicking around on the show. And this came down, unfortunately, it came down right as we were signing off. So I wasn't really able to unpack it. And I did a little bit of reading on this when I got home last night. So it is significant news. And it's not something that is set in stone as of right now, because there's a different incoming administration. And Donald Trump has the ability now to install different leadership in the Department of Education, and they could roll back the ruling that came down yesterday. I don't know if they're going to. I see to smart people like Ross Dellinger, who wrote a good piece on this. But the U.S. Department of Education, which classifies future revenue distributions from a school to an athlete for his or her NIL rights, it's now what's known as, quote, financial assistance, which must be made proportionally available to male and female athletes, or you risk violating Title IX. So one of the reasons this is significant is more than a couple of athletic directors have already come out on record, which was just dumb to do. And I understand why you do it, because you want to send a message to your football coach and your football players in the community that you plan on investing in the sport that essentially pays for all the other sports. Like, can we be grown-ups for a second? There's a reason why the football players are getting the majority of the revenue, or the plan was to give them the majority of the revenue. It's because they generate the most revenue and therefore bankroll the athletic department. And yes, we can get into the conversation about unfair coverage and all the things, okay? All the things that are out there. And I've talked about them on the show. But if we could be grown-ups for a second, like if you, let's say you're in a sales job and you're the guy that generates the most revenue, and then your coworker next to you generates 5% of it, but you both have to be paid equal commission. That's kind of what this is. And yes, it's more complex than that. I'm not being obtuse to the details, and I get it. But this is something that I think if you're Mark Harlan, if you're Taylor Randall, if you're an athletic director, if you're a school president, if this is going to be the deal, and again, only time will tell, because there is an opportunity for new leadership in the U.S. Department of Education that could change all of this. But if this is the deal, then I think a lot of administrators and athletic directors are circling the wagon now, because the NCAA, as you guys have heard, they've agreed to allow each school in the power conferences to share up to $20.5 million in direct payments to its athletes. And that's via name, image, and likeness, okay? And that's one of the terms of a pending antitrust settlement that we still haven't heard as far as what that conclusion is going to be, and I don't think we're going to hear anytime soon. There are three big-time pieces of legislation and essentially information we're waiting for. But one of them was the clarity on what Title IX means as it pertains to NIL. So $20.5 million in direct payments. Now, according to this new ruling and this new memo, I guess is what I should say, that has to be distributed equally, 50-50 for men and women and female and male athletes. And as I referenced, we've already heard from athletic directors indicating they plan on allocating as much as 75%, if not 80%, to the football program only. So it's the Office for Civil Rights and the Division of the Department of Education, and both of those two enforce Title IX. It's mostly on the Department of Education. But the memo said future payments should be considered, quote, athletic financial assistance, and therefore must be shared proportionally between men and women and the athletes on campus. The simplest way to explain this is it depends on the percentage of male and female athletes on campus. If 50% of a school's athletes are women and then 50% are men, then 50% go to men and 50% goes to women. That's as easy. That's the easiest way to explain it. There is there is one portion of a gray area here, and I haven't seen anything over the past 24 hours to shed any light, but there's nothing about, and there's no guidance here on how payments from booster collectives closely associated with a school are impacted by Title IX. There's one kind of ambiguous, unclear statement here, and it says this: if money from private sources end up creating a disparity in an athletic program, it is possible that NIL agreements could, quote, trigger a school's Title IX obligation. But that's not set in stone. I mean, that's very much gray. It's not black or white. So if you're a school and you're trying to get a little creative here, do you tap into these booster collectives that are not a part of the institution but are closely related to the athletic department, boosters, donors, outside companies, right, to potentially try to get maybe that revenue in a direction of, your initial intent? But that is unclear as of now. Another thing that came out is male and female athletes also deserve equivalent publicity, including in sports information personnel, the amount and quality of promotion, and even in social media postings. So if a school fails to provide equitable publicity, those students risk losing out on NIL opportunities, according to this memo. According to ESPN, 55 athletic departments, about 84% of the then Power Five, this was a year ago, mentioned men's teams more often than women's teams on their main accounts on what was then Twitter, now X, and women's teams were more likely to have to share their social media managers with other teams. So this is going as far as to say, okay, if you are sending out an Instagram about the men's basketball game tonight, you have to send one out about the women's basketball game as well. That's the easiest way to explain it. So that's where we're at with this. I bring it up because it does have ramifications as far as what the future of college athletics could look like. And we'll get to more of it coming up in just a bit. But no Dave McMenamin today, I guess. We're going to bring in Sean Mooney coming up on the other side. Sean will be alongside Bill Riley for the call. Utah basketball, BYU basketball. Maybe Sean will give us a little hope on the program on a Friday. 4 o'clock hours, Max Brown and Kyle Bonagura. We'll go from there. On a Friday, drive, keep it here on ESPN 700. We got what is shaping up to be a potentially very exciting college basketball game coming up at the Huntsman Center tomorrow night here in Salt Lake City. University of Utah taking on BYU. It is the Holy War on the hardwood. Utah is actually a slight favorite at home. Our next guest will be on the call alongside the voice himself, Bill Riley. Great to have Sean Mooney back on the show. Sean, happy Friday, man. How we doing?
Oh, man, Spence Checketts, I am so excited. Yeah, no, really good, brother. So Friday afternoon, who knows that we would have thought it would be this important for both teams? 2 and 3 coming in, and actually conference games, Spence. How good is that?
Yeah, for the first time since 2012, a conference tilt. And, to your point, and I've been talking about this, Sean, on the show, I think I'll just speak for myself. Prior to the start of the season, Utah basketball schedule comes out. And based off of Kevin Young's talent on paper with a top 10 pick in Yegor Demon and potentially a first-round pick in the Cannon Catchings kid, and then a bunch of skilled players that have played for BYU for a while. Kevin's a new coach. But I think it's fair to say on paper this felt like a mismatch to start the season. And we're sitting here the night before, and it's essentially a toss-up. What does that say about what Craig has been able to do to get this thing on the right path for now? And is that an indictment of BYU's inability to figure it out so far?
Man, yeah, I'm with you. On paper, you're looking at that team, and whenever you talk about a kid that's going to be an NBA prospect, right, that's just a different level athlete, and they've arguably got 2 of them. And I agree with you. On paper, they look really good at the beginning of the year. I would have said the same thing. To your point with what Craig's doing, I think the Iowa State was a really big game for our team in terms of their ability to recognize that they can play physically at a high level. Even though we got beat by 31, I've been telling people this, Spence, we were pretty good, man. We learned something about ourselves in terms of the physicality of the Big 12. And our first 3 games, Spence, were tough, man. Those are great teams that we played. And then you get a couple wins, and all of a sudden things change a little bit. And we're also playing a little longer. If you'll notice, Jake Wallin and Kiana Dawes, both 6'9". Craig's done a good job, man. We're adjusting well to what teams are doing defensively. And I mean, Kevin Young, this is his first year as a head coach. I know he's a great coach. I know they got a lot of talent, but it's hard. It's even, I think he would be the first to tell you, it's hard to be a head coach. So
what, from your vantage point, have you seen over the past couple of games that have led to results and wins that you believe is, just some things that Craig has been able to find, whether it's rotations, whether it's schematics, they're playing a little quicker. I mean, they're so big and physical, but the pace has been a little bit better, sharing the basketball really well. They're the best team in the conference when it comes to assist to turnover, and they're really moving it, and they just look a lot better. Is this something you're willing to say is getting close to a trend that Craig has figured out some lineup changes or some schematic approaches over the past couple of games? Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So it's interesting because at the beginning of the year, Spence, I think he let him just go. They kind of ran more of a motion. What that means is they got to make their decisions based on what the other team was doing. And then there where it felt like you had to kind of scheme things a little more. If anything, I think what we're handling better is the pressure. So in this league, people love to double on-ball screens, and they love to double the post. TCU just kept doing it, Spence. I don't know why they didn't go out of it. They'll even double the post off the block, but we're adjusting well to that. Typically, when you get a double in this league, it's not the first pass, but it's the pass after the first pass that creates a mismatch or an advantage. And I think Utah's done a really good job. Both of our bigs, I would say Lawson is one of the best passers. Big passers are doing a good job. KD is doing a good job. Ez is doing a good job. Jake Wallin has really been a big insert in the lineup. Not only can he defend, but he's long and he's just kind of a jack of all trades. So I wouldn't say initially that it's schematics, but I would say that we're kind of finding our niche in terms of how to play offense against these defenses we're seeing.
Do you anticipate rotationally the starting 5 will remain the same, and the guys that are getting, because he's kind of trimmed the rotation a bit, at least over the past couple of games, starting 5 and 3 off the bench. Pat Riley always used to say during practices he would run. He said, "I want my 8." This is prior to the playoffs with the Knicks in the 90s. Who are my 8, right? And so I'm not saying that it's going to be 8 all year, but it appears that he has tightened his rotation Craig has, Sean. Do you think that's going to be the deal, at least for the interim moving forward?
Yeah, no, Spence, I do think that probably is the deal. But what I think people have to recognize, and you'll understand this because this is what you do for a living, it's a long season. There are 20 games, and I can tell you, just being on the radio side, it's a pretty good slog, man. I mean, you are every week on the road. Right now, we've been home on the road. And so it really helps to have that 10 or 11. You'll see a lot of teams that have it, but I do think you have to tighten it up. In the last game in TCU, Spence, our starting five didn't come out to that first media timeout. That's unusual. That hasn't been happening. And so I do think that helps the kids in terms of their flow. And I do think you'll see moving forward this same starting lineup that we've had. And they're big, they're long, and that's going to help us. BYU is also big and long. You've got a Mike Sharpjumps and a Jaeger Demon playing against each other, 2 6'9" guards.
Yeah, a lot of length with both those two, and I do want to get to Demon in a minute and BYU in a minute, but I want to lean into the Utes for a couple of more moments here. And
love it.
I'm not a comparison guy because I think it puts unrealistic expectations in the minds of fans. But I was trying to kind of figure out exactly who Gabe Madsen is in the realm of how Craig wants to use him. And I'm not saying that he's Reggie Miller, okay, Sean? I'm not saying that he's Reggie Miller, but I can remember those old, Nick Heat battles where Reggie would run for miles and miles and miles. Then you run into a pick. It's either set by Dale Davis, Antonio Davis, or Rick Smits. And, and Reggie's wide open in space. And the thing is, it wasn't just that he could kill you with his shot. It was the gravity effect that opened up, it was Byron Scott for a minute. He had these teammates that could knock down open shots. And so I think one of the keys for Utah all year long, quite frankly, not just tomorrow, is to get Gabe in space, but not just to shoot it, so that gravity effect opens it up for other players. And then then it's make or miss, Sean. Then it's make or miss, right? But how have you seen Utah utilize Gabe, and what do you think he can do with this matchup tomorrow night?
Well, here's the thing we know. Burgess is on the other sideline, okay? And Chris Burgess is a very, very good coach, and Burgess knows what we're doing probably better than anyone. But I do think that there are some things that we can specifically do. For example, and we saw it in the TCU game, I agree with you, Gabe he's so important to the team in so many ways. He ends up with 16 against TCU, and he has a horrible shooting night for him. He can't make it to save his life, but he hits those free throws at the end of the game. But he does create a problem wherever he goes, and you're going to be no help, no cover on him. And it's an in-state game where it's even a little higher intensity. Like what no help, no cover means is they're not going to leave him to help off. They won't help off him. They won't cover down. Gabe can be a decoy, in essence, when he's out there on the floor. And listen, I'm telling you, I think Gabe Madsen's going to have a big game tomorrow. I just feel it, Spence.
Now, let's define that, though. Because that Kevin is going to sick like Richie Saunders on him. And, to use the old Gene Hackman line, tell me what flavored gum he's chewing after the game. Like, BYU is going to do everything they can to eliminate his airspace and make him a willing passer as opposed to an open shooter. Because if Gabe gets open and knocks down shots, and it changes everything. So what does a big game look like? Are you talking just knocking down shots or just an overall approach?
Yeah, no, overall approach for sure. So what everyone is doing with Gabe, TCU did not do this as well. He got some wide open shots against TCU as a surprise, but they're going to make Gabe put it on the floor. And then what they're doing with Gabe, teams are doing is his dribble, and they're sitting, they kind of know his tendencies. And so what Gabe needs to do is have very good vision when he puts it on the rack. And honestly, sometimes Gabe just needs to go finish at the rim because he's looking to pass it, which is great. He's very selfish. But no, I think Gabe, knowing Gabe the little bit that I know him, I think this is a game where Gabe impacts not only from a scoring standpoint, but impacts it from a passing and creating havoc on the floor with his presence, just like you talked about.
So you referenced, let me pull up his splits here for a moment. I just had him up. But you referenced Keanu Dawes as of late. There's a lot to like. And the more and more I watch, I kind of feel like this could be a player that maybe I didn't hone in on enough, that I probably should watch more to see what he could mean to this team moving forward. What have you seen as far as his growth? What stands out most to you about how he's improved?
One, he's legit 6'9". He's legit a legit athlete, right? So he's that next level kind of athlete. He's really nice, which is good and bad. And he had a kind of a string of confidence problems, I would say. And what fans don't know, and you and I have talked about this, is when you're in practice, you got to practice well to get playing time. And I think you've seen KD get more playing time, and obviously that's feeding him. He does some things really well around the rim, not just getting on top of the rim. He can get on top of the rim. Those dunks he had against TCU were amazing. But he slows down, Spence, and he typically finishes well around the rim. And now we're starting to see, because he can also shoot it, he's a good shooter, you're starting to see teams play him tight, and he's getting a nice sweep. He was a guard for most of his career. He's kind of one of those kids that was a guard, and now he's 6'9" and super athletic. I think he's a key to our team.
Oh, wow. All right. I like it. And like I said, the more and more I've watched, the more and more I like it. But I will simply concede to you because you see all these games. Before I get your thoughts on BYU, as a guy that's around the team, travels with the team, what have these back-to-back wins, what have they done? Because I don't care what level you're playing, man. You could be in junior jazz. You lose 10 games. Like, just can we win one, please? So back-to-back wins, what has it done for the group?
Yeah, I mean, you can just see the confidence with the kids. It really does change things. You know, first time we've been in the Big 12, everyone talks about how good it is, and it is good, but it really helps to know that you can win on the road. We basically led that game from the beginning. There was one tie, and we did everything we needed to do to win that game. We especially are defending well. So I would say the defense travels, and we're going to need it. You know, BYU offensively has some very, very good players, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But I think confidence more than anything, and kids believing in themselves.
Why is my microphone? Oh, there we go. I'm sorry about that.
Where'd you go?
Well, just a little peek behind the curtain. I am a sports talk radio host with no control over my microphone. It's the dumbest thing, Sean. It's the dumbest thing, but we can move on from it. All right.
I believe you.
It's just, you know what? We'll talk off air, and maybe you can help me dance it out because it's pissing me off. But let's move on.
For sure, brother.
I like it, but let's move on. So over to BYU now, and you know, let's hone in on Yegor Demon, who apparently is a 7-figure NIL kid. I believe Gavoni's latest mock draft has him going 7, so a top 7 prospect. And look, it's easy to see the measurables. It's easy to see the raw skill. And in spurts and in moments, and look, he's becoming accustomed to playing physical college basketball. It's a new game for him. It's a different game for him. And I can see why pro scouts like him. But as you know, sometimes college performance means nothing about scouting the pros. Like Kyrie Irving played like 6 games and everybody knew he was the best player in the class. But what stands out most to you when you watch Yegor Demon, Sean?
I mean, more than anything, he wants to pass it. If I'm another athlete and I'm playing with Yegor Demon, I'm looking to get a catch all the time. I love that about kids. I think that's the number one thing for me. Obviously, his physical skill set, and also, obviously he can shoot it. I think the jury's out as to how good he can shoot it on a consistent basis. This is no disrespect to him, but number one, his passing.
So that's do you think that's the NBA ready skill? Just his size, his ability to see over defenders and be able to deliver the ball to the right people?
Yeah, I think so. And that's exactly right, Spence. Everyone has to have an NBA skill. I'm going to give a little shout out to Brandon Carlson, who just had, I think, 12 points for Oklahoma City. You know, his NBA skill is shooting. That's what it is. And he's 7 feet tall. Good for him. Love that. I think Yegor's got a much higher level. And no disrespect to Brandon, but I think he can have more than one. Obviously, playmaking in the NBA is a super high level, and at 6'9", that's an unusual playmaker.
For sure. Now, the scary thing about BYU is of the 11 players Kevin plays, I'll say 9 of them are legitimate 3-point threats. I'm not going to say 10. I'll say 9 of the 11 rotational pieces Kevin plays can shoot it from 3. Obviously,
Yeah.
Keba does not. We had him up here for a while, but he's a big body kid that can rim roll and he'll dunk on your head if you're not careful. And when they make shots, Sean, they are impossible. It's really, really tough. So rotationally, defensively on the perimeter, Utah basketball needs to do what to slow down these shooters?
Yeah, I mean, it's super simple to talk about. It's hard to do, but in essence, you want a shooter to dribble. Unless they dribble well to a shot, but you want them to dribble. So you want a shooter to be a driver, and you want a driver to be a shooter. That's the old Rick Majerus simplicity right there. I do think last year in Mark Pope's system, it facilitated them shooting a little bit better. They were really good in transition. I think they're good in transition. I mean, my take right now is Richie Saunders is probably the key to that team, how we defend him, not to disrespect anyone else. And I think Dallin Hall is a really good, I mean, heck, he's coming off the bench. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and I understand why Kevin did that, and I talked about it earlier because I honestly believe if we look last game, Dallin played 28 minutes. It looks like Yegor played 29, and they played alongside each other a little bit. But honestly, Sean, I think if I'm Kevin Young, I feel like they're better suited when Dallin's their primary ball handler and decision maker because he's played Big 12 basketball. He doesn't get rattled. He's a tough kid.
Yep.
So I agree with you that Richie Saunders is key to what they do. But if I'm Kevin Young, man, I really feel like Dallin Hall needs to be my primary ball handler and decision maker.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm not trying to discredit anyone or anything, but I've said this to you on your show: freshman or freshman, I don't care. I mean, I understand that Real Madrid is a high level and that he's played at a high level. Jaeger has and Catchings has as well, but I'm with you. I think Dallin Hall is a key component to that team and how they play.
You referenced the way that some of these pieces, including Dallin and Richie, played in Mark Pope's system. And, of course, Mark is now at Kentucky. And look, I've met Kevin a couple of times, and I certainly understand the appeal of hiring a coach that coached Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. If you didn't know that, just ask Kevin. I'll let you know. And then hiring coaches that play, coach in the G League and a strength conditioning staff, all the things about the pro model they're following. I get it. It's appealing. It's working, obviously, because they're signing pro prospects. But, Sean, you know this as well as anyone. Look, if it's a consensus that you have the talent, you got to show you can coach. Now it's time for you to show people you can coach. And I'm not saying he can't. I'm asking you, you reference Mark's system. What is different about the way Kevin's asking them to play?
I mean, there are a couple different things, significant different things. For me, I don't think Mark Pope's system is as good if you don't have shooters. So you got to just straight up have three-point shooters to space it out for it to be effective. I do think Kevin Young's system works a little better if you don't have some shooters. That's just the basic idea about the two systems. And I do think Kevin Young does a really good job of having his kids be crisp with the basketball. They don't waste their energy. I love that you don't see a kid get it and just start dribbling. They're effective and efficient, and they're trying to move the ball side to side. But I would say that you've got a head coach who's been a head coach for a while, Mark Pope, and you've got Kevin Young, who was an assistant coach. And I think every coach in America will tell you there's a big difference between being an assistant coach and a head coach. And I think he's even probably said that. And he's only going to get better as he learns.
How, on the football side of things, and maybe it's just because football feels a little bit more, how do I say this, like a religion. And so when a player transfers, it's like you have left us and we hate you forever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Keba comes back to the Huntsman Center. You've got Hunter Erickson and Jake Wallin, who are BYU transfers. Does it feel like there's a little – it's not the same as football, right? Because those people are lunatics. We love them. Thank you for listening. But is there the same type of, emotional tie to these players that have played at either institution?
No, I don't think so. I mean, listen, I want the best for Keba. I'm glad that he's found a place. I mean, he's been really good. Look at his rebounding. And for Jake, they'd be the first to tell you that, and we will tell you this, I'll tell you this from my era, pretty much whether the fans know it or not, all of these athletes in the summer, it's bragging rights. You want to win these games to win the games, but also when you play basketball, you're playing against all of these players all summer long. You've grown up with them. So we know each other, and honestly, most of these athletes are friendly, and it's about bragging rights in the summer.
All right, Sean, before I set you loose, simple question. Utah basketball wins tomorrow night if what?
Man, that's a great question. So, number one, we've got to out-rebound them. They're a very good rebounding team. We have to out-rebound them. And then really, we've got to change that ball side to side, and we've got to put pressure, good pressure, Spence, on the rim, effective pressure, where we're actually having good vision and seeing what the defense is giving us as we get into the paint.
Sean, you are the man. Always appreciate your time. Dance
Thanks,
your
man.
Friday night away and have a great call tomorrow night, all right?
I will, Spence. Thanks so much. You as well, brother.
All right, the great Sean Mooney. He'll be on the call with Bill Riley tomorrow night, 7 o'clock sharp. It's Utah BYU. It's the Holy War on the hardwood. And what if I told you, I'm not going 30 for 30, but what if I told you in September that on January 18th, Utah basketball would be a favorite to beat BYU here in Salt Lake? That's where we find ourselves. The line is 1.5. Vegas has Utah as a slight favorite, according to the FanDuel Sportsbook. And Ken Palm, good friend of the show, also has Utah as a 1-point favorite, but he also has his model projecting literally a 50-50 toss-up. So your guess is as good as mine. All right, 2 hours down, 2 hours to go on this Friday afternoon. The 4 o'clock hour of the show is all football. Little Notre Dame, Ohio State preview and some Utes and some Big 12 with Max Brown. Kyle Bonagura stops by after that. And then we'll move over to the 5 o'clock hour of the show. We say goodnight a little bit early because tonight the Utah women have a big game taking on TCU. Utah number 23 in the country. TCU is ranked number 10. That's going to come your way at about 5:15 on a Friday afternoon. Happy Friday to you. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. We got a busy, busy weekend on this little radio station that extends through Monday night. Monday night is the national championship game in college football. It's Notre Dame, it's Ohio State. You're going to hear NFL playoff football over the weekend. You're going to hear some Utah BYU basketball. Let's do some college and pro football with one of our favorites, my guy Max Brown, back on the drive. Max, happy Friday, brother. How we doing?
Happy Friday, Spence. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. All right, your favorite weekend of NFL playoff football is which weekend and why?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, right. That's what majority think this upcoming weekend is that. I'm saying the first full week of college football, so not week 0, but the true week 1, September 1st. I feel like it's not only the first real taste of football we get, but it's turning the page on summer and settling into what the fall will be. So, and there's so much anticipation. There's like a month and a half of anticipation leading up. So I'll go Labor Day weekend for me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. I do want to get a thought from you. Well, not just a thought, but a good preview on Monday night, and we'll probably end there. But let's do a little bit of local stuff, and I won't hold your feet to the fire because your attention has been elsewhere. But generally speaking, you can speak to the fact that Utah football has brought in a new offensive coordinator, just a bevy of new players. Basically, most, if not all, the skill position players will be new. A total of 41 new players. That's 53% roster turnover, which I guess is simply the new normal in college football. But the way I'll pose the question, Max, is what gives you the most confidence that year one in the Big 12 for the Utes was an anomaly, a moment in time, and not what the new normal is for this program?
Yeah, I think two things jump out to me there. It's one, that you got Kyle Whittingham as your head coach, so obviously gives you confidence in the stability there. And there's even throughout his tenure when there have been the high points, even when I was in school, I think there was one year in there from that 13 to call it 16 range where, Utah did take a step back, but it doesn't mean that then, like a lot of programs where then that step back means that you've lost momentum forever. I feel like Kyle Whittingham has a track record of like, hey, you can have it down a year and then come back and still contend for championships. So that's the first year. But I also go to like the whole just Cam Rising calendar year that was, the expectations put on this program, the fact that you came into a new conference, and I was one of them that said, hey, Utah is going to be the standard in the Big 12. And I think those expectations were different for Utah. I think the Cam Rising guessing game takes a toll not only on him, not only on the offense, but my sense is from afar that it took a toll on your team, especially just because off-season wise, when he's getting the reps, so you're necessarily, you're not giving the reps to Wilson or another guy out there to give him a true shot. I just think there's something to be said about, not going back and forth, not having that guessing game and having a clearer direction. I would feel more confident that gives your team the ability to march in one direction versus last year, again, with the expectations and the uncertainty around Cam Rising. It felt like it was just hard to get your footing in a conference that was beating each other up at the top of the conference.
You referenced Cam Rising, and one piece of news: we got a little January media availability with the Utah coaching staff, which doesn't happen often. And we had Jason back on the show, which was fun. My first chance to interview him, but Coach Witt didn't more or less make it official. Did make it official that Cam's not on the roster. They're moving forward without him. He's mentioned that Cam will announce what his next steps are in his time, and we haven't heard from Cameron yet. But you were a guy that during your time with the Pac-12 network, you covered those teams when Cam was healthy and right. And as he now moves on to his next phase in life, how should Utah fans remember Cam Rising?
As one of the best quarterbacks to ever wear that uniform. And, it's a funny – there's two sides to this, right? There's one of the best quarterbacks to ever wear the Utah uniform, the Rose Bowl memories, the leveling up the class that Utah was. When I was, in the Pac-12 as a player from 13 to 16, Utah was competitive. Utah was a force to be reckoned with. Utah was, hey, you knew that you had to buckle up your chin strap. But I think the Cam Rising era took Utah to a different level of expectation and a different standard. And 10, 20 years from now, when you look back, I think Cam will be the symbol for what that era meant for Utah football. But on the flip side, I think it's hard not to sit there and think, hey, what could have been, that there was more out there, I guess is a better way to put it, with, hey, maybe getting that Rose Bowl win, or what could have been in the 2024 season, even the 2023 season, sitting there and knocking on the door. I think there's two sides to it. There's the acknowledge how far the program's come, and his tenure was a big reason why, but also, the meat left on the bone. And I'll also even take it back to I remember the days when Cam Rising was sitting there in that quarterback competition and lost the job and stuck around and, got the nod week 3 or week 4. And it wasn't a foregone conclusion that, he was the dude. I mean, nowadays, I see the pictures of, I remember when Cam Rising was a Texas Longhorn and then transfers to Utah, and you kind of brush over the fact that, hey, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that he was going to be a stud. He had to grind and be patient. And I think a lot of what he represented is what the Kyle Whittingham era has been at Utah, and will probably continue to be once the baton is passed to the next guy.
One more thing here, and I don't want to bring up anything in the past that's uncomfortable, and I'm not trying to be your therapist, but maybe we can process on a Friday, Max, because you're a guy like Cam Rising once upon a time that took a little heat from a college football fan base that was very passionate and very hopeful that maybe you could do some things that for whatever reasons didn't fully work out. And over the final couple of years, Cam took a lot of guff and a lot of grief from a lot of fans. And as I keep saying on air, you always have the option of not tweeting. You can put it in your drafts and go for a walk and come back and decide. And I don't love to get a lot of attention to cowards who use the internet to feel brave. But as somebody who went through that, what's it like when your own fan base seems to turn on you like that?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the articles that I remember is one of my last days at USC before I transferred to Pitt was a front page of our USC newspaper about, hey, forget exactly what the title was, but the thesis of the article was, hey, if Max Brown never started and we started with Sam Darnold from week 1, we'd be national champions. That was the 2016 season. Oof. That's the year that USC beat Saquon Barkley in the Rose Bowl, and I started those first 3 games, went 1-2, and actually Darnold's first start was at Rice-Eccles in Utah. And I mean, I don't blame I mean, it's a captivating article for that student reporter to write, but those are the ones, as I'm turning 30 next month, those are the ones that you remember. So it's tough, but I do think for me, even as being a transfer, I didn't even have remotely the success that Cam Rising did. As the years go on, I've found that, the negative buzz, the negative memories, the negative chatter, those fall by the wayside, and the good memories do have a tendency to rise to the top, especially when you handle yourself the way that Cam did, and again, had the success that he did. I think that, hey, 5-7 years from now, when Cam returns and probably gets a halftime recognition or end of first quarter recognition, I have a strong belief that it'll be everyone getting out of their seat, applauding him, and those are the memories that he'll have, and I'm sure right next to his Utah helmet, Utah football, and his man cave for the rest of time.
Well said. Hey, just total non sequitur, but since you were in a situation once upon a time competing with Sam Darnold, I wonder what your insight is on, because as you know, Max, I'm a long-suffering New York Jets fan. And over the past number of years, Sam was the guy who I thought was going to be the one that could maybe lead us to something somewhat special. Who knows? But I liked him coming out of college, and it didn't work in New York. It doesn't work in New York with anybody. You end up taking peyote and speaking to caterpillars. Weird things happen to you. But what sort of questions has Sam answered this year, and what do you think that last performance may have cost him, and what do you think his future is?
I think he's answered the question that he's a legitimate NFL starting quarterback, and any notion of him being a bust is gone, which is amazing. I'm happy for the guy. He's one of the good ones. Easy to root for, even though we battled all throughout our college careers. He's an awesome human being. So pumped to see him have success. So I think he answered that question. I think what goes unanswered is, how much of that was a byproduct of being in a friendly Vikings offense with a very capable play caller that's had success with multiple quarterbacks. And that'll be the question for Sam this offseason, I think, is, does he find, or does he potentially take less to stay in Minnesota, or does he go to a different franchise? And I chuckled right there, because I think if you're the New York Jets, you'd be silly not to at least field a call to Sam's agent and see what's out there, given the unclear quarterback situation the Jets are in long term. But I have a feeling that of all the teams out there in the NFL, one team will be able to put together a Baker Mayfield type offer, or potentially even better, because I think it's interesting. This quarterback draft class, you're going to see Shedeur Sanders, you're going to see Cam Ward, but there's a steep drop off to get to quarterback 3, in my opinion. Yet there's still a chunk of teams at like 7, 8, 10, 12 in the draft order that need to answer quarterback questions. I mean, whether it's the Jets, whether it's the Raiders, whether that's the Saints long term and what they do with Derek Carr. So I think Giants as well. I'm of the opinion I think the Giants will be on the outside looking in if the top 2 quarterbacks go 1-2. So there's a lot of teams that have questions and need to find answers at the quarterback position. That works in Sam's benefit. And I think he's shown that even though the last 2 games didn't go great, that he is a legitimate NFL starter, and it's no longer just a hey, nice to have a capable backup type of guy.
All right, moving over to some college football here, and my first question regarding where we're at now is, I continue to use this line on the show because I just realized that with the new nature of all of this stuff, for me, it's impossible to prognosticate. So I moved over to more, diagnosing. Why did this happen? How can we make it better? And we'll get to the game on Monday. But now that we do have the first example of a 12-team expanded CFP unfolding to the point where we have a final matchup, you like it? You don't like it? What needs to change? Where are you at with the new format now that we have some data behind us?
Yeah, I love the 12-team structure for sure. I'm in the camp that, and I don't know if this is a mainstream take yet, but it is amongst some of the folks that I listen to. I'm of the camp that they should reseed after the first round. I like rewarding conference champions with that first round bye and giving them a leg up. But I do think it's funny. I was talking with a Penn State fan this morning. Like, I do think, Penn State losing in the Big Ten championship, yet getting a more favorable road than Oregon is, not ideal for the structure of the playoff. And I think reseeding after that first round. So once you have 8 total teams, that would have put, the Boise State at rank number 8, or Arizona State at 8, Boise State at 7. That to me solves a lot of the problems. I'm very wary of, wholesale changes of guaranteed spots for the SEC or guaranteed spots for the Big Ten or even Big 12 as well, because I just think every year is different. And that's the beauty of college football. That's the beauty of what we do for a living, because we're able to analyze it all. But if you had the 12-team playoff structure last year, the number 5 team would have been Florida State without Jordan Travis. And this big storyline was Jordan Travis's injury would have been the 12-team playoff storyline. And everyone would have wanted to play Florida State as a number 5 seed with their backup quarterback right there. Versus this year, that 5 seed was Penn State. It was a different vibe. I also don't think year in and year out we're going to have as strong of a group of 5 champ. I think Boise State is as strong of a group of 5 champ as we're going to get, at least in the immediate term of college football. That's going to be different next year. I think there's a world where maybe the Big 12 doesn't beat up on each other every year. If this season went how a lot of Utes fans hoped it went, and Utah was sitting there as a 1-loss Big 12 champ, I think a lot of the chatter around the Big 12 being maybe like a secondary or very much secondary compared to the Big 10 or the SEC, that wouldn't be the case. So every year is different. I think the 12-team structure allows for those dynamics to play out. But I think reseeding after that first round would solve a lot of the complaints that people had in December.
All right, so moving over now to, let's actually go back a little bit before we move forward, and your thoughts on your thoughts on what we saw with Texas and Arizona State, and whether or not I don't know. I mean, you've already talked about different seedings, different buys, but did Arizona State's performance against Texas? Was that a Big 12 statement at all, or was that just Arizona State answering in a vacuum like, yes, we belong here?
It's a good question. I think I view it more as, I guess, yes, a Big 12 statement, but more of all right, the SEC is not just this almighty invincible conference that, we've been used to throughout the Nick Saban era. The days of being able to just stockpile backups and stockpile depth and take it away from those other schools are gone. And that was more my takeaway from the Arizona State-Texas game where, hey, if that matchup is played, or maybe a better reference is Arizona State-Alabama from 5 years ago, there's a world where that outcome is much different because of the depth that an Alabama team has versus Texas now. Yes, they're still the top of the SEC, but I don't think it's that invincible nature that we once had, which I think is great for the game of college football, and Arizona State showcased that. So that was my takeaway, and also just a takeaway from an Arizona State lens is, and Spence, you'll be able to relate to this because it was, a talking point for Arizona State for much of their Pac-12 history about how much they were a, sleeping giant and whatnot. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And my takeaway was, hey, maybe Kenny Dillingham has unlocked something there that is sustainable at Arizona State of being the sexy, lack of a better term, team out west for a lot of these Texas and Big 12 rooted guys that I feel confident that Arizona State, maybe not winning 11 games every year, but contending for Big 12 titles, that identity is here to stay as long as Kenny Dillingham's there.
All right, so we have ourselves an interesting game on Monday night. Before we get to the actual matchup, let's talk about the two teams and their path to how they got here. And I don't know, man, Marcus Freeman, when he first took that job at the age of 35, there's the home loss against Marshall, a lot of noise about is he ready. It's wild that his first coaching job is the head coach of Notre Dame. But this meteoric rise now at the age of 39, there's a little like McVay to this, and he's become one of my favorite coaches to listen to. I think he's a preeminent communicator. His players clearly love him, but nobody, at least in my opinion, and from what I understood, listening to people who I respect break this thing down, I don't think there are very many people, if any people at all, that had Notre Dame in the college football championship game coming up on Monday. So what do you make of their path, how they got here, and your thoughts on their head coach?
Yeah, it was funny because in August, they were, at least from what I was listening to, a lot of people's sleeper team just because you got Riley Leonard, who at one point in time, Mel Kiper had him as a first-round quarterback, at least last season before that ankle injury. And so you go and got a big-time, at least on paper, signal caller, and then Notre Dame had a bunch of guys coming back. So, there was hype and obviously a relatively easy schedule, especially when you look at Big Ten schools and SEC schools having to play each other and beat up on each other. So I think in August, I saw a trajectory where they could be in this scenario, or at least in the Final Four and in the conversation. But then that NIU game happened, and I remember watching that game, and I called NIU's game a couple weeks later, and you watch that game, Notre Dame left a ton of offense, especially on the field, and I tweeted this out at the time. I was like, don't be surprised if they figure this thing out and find themselves at that point, with one loss facing a USC team to potentially go into the playoff, and that's kind of how it played out. The big difference that I noticed, though, not only with Marcus Freeman, and he deserves credit because you're giving up play calling, or he doesn't handle play calling duties, so you're trusting your assistant coaches. And I think Mike Denbrock, their offensive coordinator, totally pivoted after that NIU game and said, hey, the reality is Riley Leonard is not an NFL quarterback, and that's the camp that I'm in, and I know Colin Cowherd saying, oh, he's the next Josh Allen. I'm not there. I don't think he's asked to do nearly the amount in the passing game on a down in, down out basis as some of those other guys. But he shifted the offense and said, I'm going to lean on Riley Leonard's legs. It's going to be run centric first and second, and we're going to pass on third down and have that be our identity, not try to force him to win on first and second down as a progression passer. And the team took a liking to that identity. They deserve a ton of credit for doubling down in that identity, and it's got them to the place that they're in. And the redemption story of Marcus Freeman, you said it. He started off a little it was rocky for sure, but I think his overall vibe of resurrecting a Notre Dame that pretty much my entire adult life has been, even when Brian Kelly was winning games, it was still a little bit stale and stiff. Those days are gone, and Marcus Freeman deserves all the credit for that.
On the other side, and look, I don't know how true the narrative is that if Ryan Day doesn't win a national championship, he's going to lose his job. But, he hasn't beaten Michigan in 4 straight games, and that Ohio State fan base is as passionate, front-facing, and expressive as any fan base in the country. And, it certainly is fair to bring up the failures against your rival, and I understand that. First, before we talk about their path, do you think there's anything there? Like, if they don't win on Monday, do you think Ryan Day is really in trouble?
I think there's something there. I think it's a conversation. I'm not going to sit here and say I think he should get fired. I'm not there yet. It's to me, and I have the feelings inside me are honestly similar to how the Steelers talk is around Mike Tomlin, where it's like Mike Tomlin continues to win at a high level, but then he loses in that playoffs. And it's almost like if you're Mike Tomlin's camp, it's like you'd almost rather him tank for 1 year, so then they have a shot at getting a quarterback. So then he's, has a better shot of actually winning that elite level. But because he continues to just maximize what he has, but then stub his toe at the end, it like almost works against him. The comp to Ryan Day is they're winning a ton of games. They're consistently in the national championship picture. They have an extremely promising trajectory and future when it comes to recruiting. But then there's the Michigan thing. But then, and especially in this scenario, if you were to lose to Notre Dame, especially because Notre Dame's a quasi kind of Midwest rival, I think the cranking up the heat would be valid. I wouldn't be totally surprised if they pull the plug. Just like with Mike Tomlin, I could see a scenario where it's, hey, we have to fire because it's getting this stale, distracting narrative, this dark cloud over our fan base and over our franchise and program, where we have to move on. We don't think you're a bad coach, but this cloud has been hanging above us for too long where we have to make a change. I could see the AD having that thought process, and it sounds crazy, but you also can convince yourself that, man, it's easy for anyone to recruit with that NIL budget and go down that storyline. So I think Ryan Day would be hired by the next coach or by the next blue blood program that had a job opening. But I also think it's a little bit of the reality of the situation that Ohio State finds themselves in over the past few seasons.
Okay, let's move over now to their path because they just smoked Tennessee. And if I'm an Oregon fan, I feel a little hard done because of the way this thing went down. Because Ohio State might be, as you know, the most talented team in the country. Most people believe that. They take care of the number one team in the country, and then they handle Texas relatively easily. So what do you make of what they've been able to do to advance, and have they figured some things out in your mind?
I think so. Yeah, I buy the storyline that a lot of folks are saying of, you lose to Michigan, and I think it put a chip on their shoulder. I think they're able to activate this underdog mentality, which I don't know how much of an underdog you can be when you're at Ohio State and all the, the NIL and recruiting funds that they have. But obviously something's clicked for them. I think it'll come down to the quarterback play, which it obviously does for most football games. But Riley Leonard and Will Howard, to me, fall into a similar bucket where they're, fringe NFL guys. They're effective college quarterbacks, but it oftentimes comes down to, a third down throw here or there. Or can you win that one-on-one matchup on the outside and make enough plays when they're right there? Or do the, especially a Notre Dame defense that's solid, do they rise to the occasion as well? So I think I have no doubts about the quality of Ohio State's defense. We know about their skill players. I do think something was found in this last game of how they were able to defend Jeremiah Smith and not let Jeremiah Smith go. And I think mixing up those looks is big. But to me, it comes down to which of these quarterbacks can be more efficient on third down, protect the ball. And when you do have those one-on-one matchups, how many times are we looking up saying, all right, that's a 25, 30-yard gain down the field because they were able to just execute and catch the rock.
All right, Max, before I set you loose, how do you see this playing out? Ohio State, let me check the line. Let me make sure that this is still the case. Ohio State is a favorite. As of now, it's 8.5. The over-under is 45.5. Games on our station. How do you think it plays out?
I think it's a grimier game than that line indicates, that 8.5-point line. I think Ohio State wins, but it's a game that goes into the fourth quarter. I feel confident Notre Dame's defense to at least make things tough for Ohio State. And again, both these quarterbacks, this is not a J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix type of show that we saw last year in the national championship where you're saying, hey, both those guys are going to be NFL first-round draft picks. Both these quarterbacks are good college quarterbacks, but I think they will make mistakes. I think they will miss opportunities that'll keep the game closer and a little bit more murkier, especially with how strong both these defenses are and a little bit of Notre Dame's run game as well. So the Fighting Irish keep it close, but ultimately Ohio State gets it done. The monkey goes off Ryan Day's back, and we can finally stop talking about that, and the Buckeyes win the national championship.
Max, you are the man. As always, I just say I hope for a good game coming up on Monday. Final one we get for a number of months. Appreciate you, dude. Have a great weekend. We'll chat soon, okay?
was fun. Thanks, Spence. Appreciate you.
All right. The great Max Brown. Got to know him during the Pac-12 days. Always appreciate his time. He's the lead college football analyst over the CW now, and he's really, really good on social media if you're into kind of like the TikTok. Well, is TikTok around anymore?
Not as of next week.
So next week it's done.
Tentatively.
Man, I'm so glad I never got on that damn thing. But anyway, he's fun on social media. Get him on Twitter at MaxBrown4 is where you find him. Yeah, we've got the game coming up on Monday night, Ohio State, Notre Dame, the College Football Playoff National Championship presented by AT&T. Let's go ahead and take care of the sponsors. Ohio State, 8.5-point favorite. The over-under is 45.5. We got more college football coming up next. Maybe a skosh of RSL, but I'm not sure that Kyle Bonagura has been dialed in on soccer yet, so mostly college football with Kyle coming up on the other side on a Friday afternoon/evening right here on ESPN 700. All right, rolling along here, 4 o'clock hour of the program. We are going to say goodnight early on a Friday. We'll get our weekend started out the right way. Hopefully you guys are going to do the same thing. Going to make way for Utah Women's Hoops. Number 23, Utah Women's Hoops, taking on number 10, TCU on the road. Comes your way at about 5:15 tonight, so stay tuned for that. We've had a really busy show, as you would expect, on this jam-packed Friday before a really, really big sports weekend that bleeds all the way into Monday night. Don't forget NFL playoff football on our station. Of course, you can hear Utah men's basketball taking on Brigham Young. We talked a lot about that game on the show today. That was our topic right out of the gates, and we brought in Sean Mooney for a comprehensive preview. Sean's going to be alongside Riles tomorrow for the call, the voice of the Utes. Utah, a slight favorite. That's right. What if I told you, not 30 for 30 style, but back in August or September, that we were going to be approaching January 18th when BYU was going to be in town and Utah would actually be the favorite to win that game? Well, they are. Vegas has them as a slight favorite. Last check, 1.5 points. Ken Palm, our guy who covers college basketball, is kind of a North Star for me and has been for a number of years, has Utah as a slight favorite with his model. Although it is a pick'em, kind of a 50-50 game, so a bit of a toss-up. So that's going to be at 7 o'clock tomorrow at the Huntsman Center. I want to remind you that it is a red out, so make sure you are wearing red and not your white Utah shirt, your black Utah shirt. Wear some red and show up early. Show up in your seats in the lower bowl so BYU fans don't buy all the cheap tickets up top and then just kind of traverse their way down low. So let's support this basketball team. They won a couple of straight games. I think it's going to be a really good game. And I'm excited for it. So if you missed Sean Mooney, good preview of that game, check out our website, which is ESPN700sports.com. And also, it's probably up on our podcast page by now. Our podcast is called Simply The Drive with Spence Checketts. It's the same name as the Daily Show, and it's available wherever you get your pods. So go check it out. How about some breaking baseball news on a mostly football and basketball Friday afternoon? Japanese star pitcher Roki Sasaki. So he is a Japanese pitching prospect that has been chased by scouts since he was in high school, has chosen the Los Angeles Dodgers as his major league home. He just announced on his Instagram page he's now 23 years old. So he joins, of course, Shohei Ohtani and the defending Super Bowl. I've got football in the mind. World Series champion Dodgers. So there's some breaking baseball news on this Friday afternoon. Of course, getting ready for the NFL playoff weekend ahead. We discussed some NFL playoff football a little bit earlier with Ben Solak, and then Ben was on TV 5 minutes after he was on our radio station. If you didn't know any better and you turned around and you saw Ben Solak on television, truly, how old do you think you would guess that he is?
I might, just to, not play too much into the little kid Ben narrative, I still am going to say like 19 or 20.
My man looks so young.
He does not look like he is graduated college or at that level yet. But I would say the football knowledge, the takes would tell you differently. The kid knows his stuff.
Oh, he's very, very good. But every time I see him on TV, I want to be like, oh, Ben,
right?
But he was awesome today, as he is as always. And then Max Brown just stopped by for a comprehensive conversation about college football, although I did ask him what his favorite NFL playoff weekend was. I don't know if I was clear on the question because he said week 1 of college football.
He must have just been really dialed into his favorite week of football because I get it. I get it if you've waited all off season, you're dialed in for week 1 and Labor Day weekend and you just sit down and watch football all weekend long. I understand if that's maybe your favorite, but over playoff weekend? Over wild card divisionals, even the conference title weekend? I don't know about that.
Because Max's point is well taken, and as I always say, and I've said as I enter 19 years now doing this thing live full-time to make a living, all of us complain during the offseason, and then on Monday night, the final college football game of the year, folks will get depressed and start the countdown. And, I'm anti-countdown until we actually don't depress folks. And, of course, NFL playoff football is fun, but this is the last real weekend of a lot of football because then it's conference championships, then it's Super Bowl, and then everybody misses it all off season long. And you complain about it when it's not here. Then you get mad about it when it's here. Then you blink, then it's gone. So I can understand why Max would say the first week of football is the best week of football, but what's your take on that? The best week of football, college or pro, is what?
Man, it's hard. I love and have always loved New Year's week, right? Because you're getting not only really good bowl games and historically the bowl games, right? Where we're in a new space now where the national title is 2 weeks into the year and whatnot. A lot of times it was on July 5th, 6th, 7th, sometimes even earlier. So the first week of January was always really fun to me, but I got to go with conference title week if we're going NFL. I know it's only 2 games, but it's 2 games that culminate in so much, right? And for me, I zero in on that week in particular on the pro side, first week of January on the college side. I will say, Spence, I understand that with the college football playoff, in order to not try to compete with the NFL playoffs, in order to try to space things out as far as the bowl goes, I think there's a little bit of a mistake being made in keeping 10, 11, 12, sometimes 14 days between rounds in the college football playoff. I understand that's how they had to make the schedule go, but there was a time where I think we went 8 days, 9 days without a playoff game during the college football playoffs, and I think that's a misstep. Even if you maybe have to compete somewhere with a primetime game on the slate, I think the energy that you kind of let up by taking so much time off is kind of an issue.
That's a good point, actually, one I hadn't fully considered. And, at the end of the day, I am a NFL over college football guy. I am. I've told you this before. The NFL a long time ago, in my opinion, was able to figure out one of the underrated members of Roger Goodell's staff is also a friend of the show, Brian Rolap, who's been in charge of their all of their production deals, their streaming deals. I don't know exactly when the NFL was able to figure out the production thing in a way that other sports couldn't. It just simply became the best television show of all the sports. And I love basketball. I love golf, love soccer, love baseball. I really enjoy watching every sport. There's something about the television product that the NFL puts out that really has allowed it to separate itself from any other sport, not just as a sport, but as a business, generating incredible revenue from multiple television partners. It's funny, last week when I was teasing the wild card weekend, I went down the schedule, and every game had a different linear partner or streaming partner, and that's the brilliance of pro football. Ultimately, I do lean into pro over college because they're the top shelf players. They're the highest skilled players. There's just something about that TV show, man, that the NFL has been able to capture. I was getting my hair cut the other day, and the guy who cuts my hair is a big Bears fan. And he's like, hey, who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl? And I said, well, if I was putting money on it, I'd probably take Kansas City. But, man, there's something about Detroit. And, like, a 65-year-old woman turned around who's getting a haircut. She's like, wait, do you think the Lions can win it? I was like, what? And she's a huge Lions fan. Like, the NFL has captured not just sports fans, but a massive number of people in our country that just love watching the TV show that it is.
Well, yeah, it has continuity. It's cohesive. Year to year, you can follow this program, this TV show, and know what's going on, right? And the NFL is done a really good job of keeping that, right? They have off-season shows. They have the Hard Knocks. They have the NFL film stuff. They have the NFL Network going all season long. They have all of this. Hell, we can talk about the Combine and the stuff that they do for the draft leading up to the season. It is a 365-day-a-year TV show, as you said, and that pays a lot of dividends when January, February comes around. I mean, those Super Bowl ratings, are bigger than just about anything else. And I think that college football, especially in the last 2, 3, 4 years, Spence, is struggling in the fact that it's tough to follow. There isn't that cohesiveness, that what you're going to get week in and week out. I don't even know what players are going to be on the team that I cheer for next year, right? And that's hard when it comes to following football, and I think it does have an effect on not just people tuning in right now because they're maybe pissed off about the transfer portal, the NIL stuff, but it's got to have an effect long term as well when you're getting kind of pushed to the NFL because it's a better product in that regard. I know we're a college football market, and we're always going to have that. We're always going to be a college football market in some sense. But you're right. I mean, the NFL has perfected the television TV show part of it, and that's really where the money is in today's age.
Yeah, and when you look at the ratings, you know, the NFL dwarfs everybody, but the only sport that approaches it even kind of is college football. And when you look at, and this has become a very inexact science as a result of streaming and pirating, quite frankly, and who's watching on the digital side, who's watching on the linear side. Ohio State, Tennessee, we have a little bit of data from the 12-team CFP. Ohio State, Tennessee, 14.3 mil. These are all first-round games, but this is what Front Office Sports has to compare to the NFL. Notre Dame, Indiana, 13.4. That's the power of the Fighting Irish. All due respect to Indiana. Texas, Clemson, 8.6 mil. Penn State, SMU, 6.4 mil. And the lowest-rated NFL game that weekend was 15.5 mil. That's the lowest-rated game. So when you kind of compare them side by side, while a lot of people watch college football, the NFL continues to really dominate the landscape. All right, a piece of interesting news broke earlier. So if you were tuned into the program yesterday, you heard me doing my best to drink through a fire hose to talk about the Department of Education ruling that Title IX applies to payment to athletes from institutions that are under the NIL umbrella. It's a little bit more ambiguous and unclear about the guidance on how payments from booster collectives need to be split. That's only time will tell. The only thing that the Department of Education said, if money from private sources ends up creating a large disparity, but no details in an athletic program, it is possible that NIL agreements could, quote, trigger a school's Title IX obligation. But this just broke about 30 minutes ago. A kid named Xavier Lucas, who was playing for Wisconsin, he's a defensive back for Wisconsin. He's leaving Wisconsin for Miami, but he is leaving without entering the transfer portal, okay? So let's walk through this a little bit, then we'll catch a break to get to the 5 o'clock hour. Wisconsin did not allow Lucas to enter the transfer portal because he signed what's called a revenue-sharing contract, which is a little bit of a new thing in college athletics. And forgive me if I land back on the same space that I've always landed on. When there is no regulation, every school can get creative about how they attract athletes, and some schools can offer revenue sharing and equity and things like that. There has to be uniformity. There has to be contracts that have been collectively bargained by a union and a central leadership that runs college football in order for things like this not to go down. But the NCAA convention is going on right now, and this is a potential precedent-setting move because this player is transferring to another institution without entering the portal, and after he signed a revenue-sharing contract with his school. And the reason the revenue-sharing contract was presented because Wisconsin thought it was a way to stop players from transferring because the contract should be binding. But this kid's lawyer has come out and said he's leaving anyway. They wouldn't let him into the transfer portal after he requested a transfer because he signed a contract. And it could have significant ramifications because now even when a school like UW has found a way that they thought that would not allow a player to transfer, he just hired an attorney. He was like, I'm doing it anyway. So this is, even though we thought we had seen it all, this is actually a bit of a new thing. We'll unpack a little bit more of this during the 5 o'clock hour. We say goodnight early for Utah women's basketball. Top 25 matchup. Utah women at TCU coming up at about 5:15. But let's welcome in Ryan from the Dish Pros. New year, new you, new budget. Save money. Your cell phone, your internet, and your cable television. You can save money on all that with the Dish Pros if you dial 801-424-DISH. What's going on, Ryan?
Definitely call us up and, take advantage of these deals that we have. Very good offers right now. We've got some amazing deals with Dish where you get price guarantee, movie channels. We're going to throw in Netflix. Now, this is the ad-free version, free for the next 2 years, worth more than $370. This is an offer you don't want to pass up. It's only here for a limited time. Call us today and get upgraded. We'll throw in dinner at JCW's, have you installed as early as next day. And guys, listen, if you haven't looked at your cable bill, haven't looked at your DirecTV bill or your streaming bill, a lot of those bills went up a whole bunch. And we can save you money, and you don't have to worry about price increases for the next 2 years. Call us, 424-DISH. Call now, 801-424-3474.
All right, there he is, Ryan from the Dish Pros. We got 3 hours down, not 1 hour to go, 10 minutes to go or so. We'll say goodnight for Utah women's basketball after a quick reset coming up on the other side on the 5 o'clock hour of a Friday show on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, what's going on? Drive at 5 time on a Friday afternoon / evening. It is. It's been a nice day today. It's been a little warm. It is cooling down. Get ready for a cold weekend. Get ready for potentially the coldest weekend we've had all winter long. I don't know if we'll get snow in the benches. Should get some in the mountains. Was up in Park City this week. Had a good time up at an event up there. It is cold. It is beautiful because it is January in Utah. Happy Friday to you. Congratulations. You made it. It is weekend time. Take a big, deep breath. I am proud of you for dragging your ass out of bed every morning. Not that easy to do at times, so good work, and hopefully you have some fun plans for the weekend. We have been talking quite a bit about what is now a very intriguing basketball game set to be played in Salt Lake City coming up tomorrow night. Reminder, coming up in just about 12 minutes from now, it's Utah women's basketball against TCU. Utah women, number 23 team in the country. TCU, the number 10 team in the country. So a big conference matchup tonight for the Utah women. You'll hear that on our radio station. For the Utah men, they welcome in Brigham Young tomorrow. BYU is looking for their first road win. This is a quad 1 opportunity for Brigham Young. It's a quad 2 opportunity for the University of Utah. Ken Palm, our guy Ken Palm, friend of the show, has Utah as a slight favorite. Utah is a 1-point favorite according to Ken Palm's model. Also, his data indicates this is a toss-up. This is a 50-50 game. Vegas, according to the FanDuel Sportsbook I have in front of me, actually has Utah as the betting favorite. They're a 1.5-point favorite. This is according to FanDuel. Of course, other sportsbooks might have it differently, and it certainly could change prior to the start of the game coming up tomorrow night. You can hear the game on our radio station with Sean Mooney, who joined us earlier, and, of course, the voice of the Utes, Bill Riley. Utah has won 2 straight Big 12 games after dropping their first 3. They're 2-3 in conference play with a win at home against Oklahoma State and then a win on the road at Fort Worth against TCU. These two teams, BYU and Utah, have common opponents. And oftentimes I scoff at the notion to try to learn anything from those common opponents. BYU lost to Texas Tech, a Texas Tech team that smoked the University of Utah. BYU went down to Fort Worth, and they got by TCU. I will say that was a make-or-miss loss for Brigham Young. BYU has a lot of firepower on the perimeter. If they get going from 3, it could be tough. And then just like Utah, they smoked Oklahoma State. But look, maybe this sounds Magoo, maybe it sounds pie in the sky, and I'm not a moral victory guy. It's not how I cover our local teams. I try to cover our teams with the standard of competing for trophies and championships, because if you're not doing that, what's the point? And so, like, when the Jazz are playing a little bit better, but they've lost 7 of 9, I'm like, all right, cool, I guess there's progress. But I do think it's actually a really good sign for where Utah basketball is at, that we're sitting here prior to the game on Friday night the 17th and talking about a really intriguing, good matchup. 2 different teams. They play different styles. They're different coaches. This really, in a way, is a coaching matchup. It's Craig Smith, who's a grizzled veteran college basketball coach who's in the midst of trying to build a culture and build a winning program, and he's won wherever he's been. And it's Kevin Young, who comes in with a lot of, I'll say, bells and whistles. It reminds me a little bit of like when Dan Lanning addressed the Oregon team prior to their matchup with Deion Sanders in Colorado, and he said, they're rooted in he said, we're rooted in substance, they're rooted in flash. And Kevin Young and his NBA resume and his ability to tell kids that I've coached Devin Booker and Kevin Durant and Chris Paul, which he talks about all the time, and his bench, which is riddled with former NBA, G League head coaches, and his staff littered with former NBA people on the strength and conditioning staff, the nutrition side of things. That's all fine and good, and it's working when it comes to NIL and their collective and locking in NBA talents. And, of course, the biggest example is next year with the best prospect in all of college basketball rolling into Provo and A.J. DeBansa, and that's grabbed the headlines, but he's got a couple of players that, according to reports, we're talking about seven-figure NIL deals for Jaeger Demon. According to Jonathan Gavoni from ESPN, his latest mock draft, Jaeger will be the number 7 pick in the draft, and who knows if that's the case, but Gavoni's really good, so he's a top 10 guy, and Cannon Catchings is thought to be potentially a first-round prospect as well. So I think it's fair to say Kevin has the superior roster. I think he has better talent top to bottom, and he has some players that have a lot of Big 12 experience with Richie Saunders and Foose Traore and Dallin Hall as well. Former Ute Bacade has played really well for them. It's a deep team. 11 of the so Kevin likes to play 11 players according to the numbers, and 9 of his 11 rotational pieces can shoot it from 3. But with all the talent he's had at his disposal, it hasn't necessarily come to fruition. And if you have talent on your roster, guess what? We're going to talk about you as a coach. You got to prove you can coach now. When it comes to actually having the horses, you have to prove you can lead them the right way. And I still feel on paper this is a bit of a matchup. I just think BYU has more talented players. I don't know that outside of Gabe Madsen, Utah basketball has a pro. I could be wrong, obviously. I think Gabe can make some money playing basketball overseas. I'm not sure he's an NBA guy, but he's a big-bodied kid that can really shoot it. I would anticipate Kevin is going to put Richie Saunders on him. Richie is an energetic young fella, to say the least. And I keep using the old Hoosiers line after the game, tell me what flavored gum he's chewing. And for Utah, you've got to get Gabe in space, not just for his ability to shoot the basketball, but that gravity effect that great shooters have to open up opportunities for other players. Utah is bigger, they're more physical, and actually, as of late, they've been playing with better pace. Utah's the best team in the Big 12 at sharing the basketball when it comes to assist percentage. This is not a team that has a ball-dominant decision-making player that you can ISO or go 1-4 flat and say make a play, or just a high pick and roll and say, okay, you do your thing. They share the ball. They have skilled players that can pass and make good decisions, and they're going to need somebody to step up and make some shots if BYU, which I anticipate them doing, continues to blitz Gabe, run 2 at Gabe, get the ball out of his hands, make him a passer, not a shooter. And so, when it comes to Utah's ability to make shots, Gabe's gravity will provide open shots for other players. Will these players step up and make shots? Will the recent rotational changes that both coaches have made, will they continue with the starting 5 in the rotations? It looks like Craig has slashed his rotation a little bit, which I kind of like, to be honest with you. I mean, look, a lot of these, whether it's pro basketball or college basketball these days, 10, 11, 12 players play significant minutes. And, of course, load management in pro basketball, pretending like players are injured, comes into this. But if we use the TCU game, I mean, Zach Keller did get 7 minutes, but Craig essentially played 8 players. And I like that. Get your best players on the floor. And Kevin Young has tinkered with a bunch of different options. Currently, he's elected to bring Dallin Hall off the bench and allowed Dallin to be the offense initiator with his second team. And part of me wonders if they would be better served allowing Dallin to be the primary ball handler with the first team and letting Yegor Demon play off the ball. Now, Demon's not necessarily a knockdown spot-up shooter, and because of his length and his ability to see over the defense, you do want him in the game because with a point guard with that type of length and size, you can see over the D and make good passes. But Dallin has that Big 12 experience and doesn't seem to be rattled in a way that so far we've seen Yegor Demon get rattled. All right, we got to get out of here. We're going to make some space for Utah women's basketball coming up on the other side. Porter, before we get a tease for Monday's show, you doing okay?
Doing great. How are you?
Well, I just have I have a tweet. We'll get to it on Monday. What comes our way to Monday's show?
Spencer Hall, of course, college football playoffs. Josh Furlong, of course, talking some college football. Rick Neuheisel on the day of the college football playoff. Tom Haberstroh, we'll talk some NBA, and we'll go from there. And yes, I'm doing okay, despite Cowboys putting me in a different place.
All right, we'll talk about it on Monday. Just hang in there this weekend, all right?
All good.
All right, that'll do it. Special thank you to Ben Solak, Dave. Nope, never mind. Ben Solak, Sean Mooney, Max Brown, and Kyle. Nope. Special thanks to Ben Solak, Sean Mooney, and Max Brown. He's Porter. I'm Spence saying goodnight. Utah Women's Hoops is next. Have a great weekend. Be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Talk to you on Monday right here on ESPN 700.